Anime Autopsy here, and I need you to do me a favor before we start. I need you to forget almost everything you think you know about One Piece. I'm serious. Wipe your mind brain clean. Because what I'm about to walk you through over the next 2+ hours is not a theory. It's not speculation. It's not me concocting cockery in my basement at 3 a.m. while surrounded by empty energy drink cans and regret. This is the actual structure of the story fictional pirate creator man has been telling you since 1997, and most of you have been reading it completely wrong. You think this story is about a rubber boy who wants to find treasure and become the pirate king. That's adorable. That's like saying Moby Dick is about a guy who really hates whales. The truth is so much bigger, so much weirder, and so much more beautiful than that. One Piece is about the death and rebirth of an entire planet. It's about 3 distinct geological epochs, 3 worlds. The first world that was destroyed, the second world that rose from its corpse, and the third world that Luffy is going to create by literally sinking continents and reunifying the seas. And if you think I'm exaggerating, stick with me, because I'm going to prove every single word of this with canonical evidence, chapter citations, and the kind of obsessive panel analysis that would make a normal person seek professional help. But here's the thing. Most people think the story of One Piece begins in chapter 1 with Luffy in that barrel. Wrong. The story actually begins on the moon. Literally, on the moon. And if you're rolling your eyes right now because you think I'm talking about filler content or some non-canonical nonsense, then congratulations, you've already proven my point. You've been ignoring the most important prologue Oda ever wrote because it was hidden in a cover story. I'm talking about Enel's Great Space Operations, the cover story that ran from chapter 470 through chapter 474, where our favourite egomaniacal thunder god with the world's most punchable face travels to the moon and discovers an ancient civilization of robots and murals that depict winged people descending to Earth. You remember that, right? You probably skimmed past it. You probably thought, oh, cute. Oda's doing some world building for fun. No, that cover story is the Genesis chapter of the entire series. It's the book of Genesis for the One Piece planet. And the fact that it was told in a cover story instead of the main narrative is the most Oda thing imaginable. The man hid the origin of his entire fictional universe in supplemental content that half his audience didn't even read. Let me paint the picture for you. Enel arrives on the moon, which he calls Fairy Earth, and immediately encounters these automaton soldiers. They attack him. He destroys them with electricity. Standard Enel behaviour. But then he discovers these ruins, these ancient structures that are clearly technological, clearly advanced, and clearly abandoned. The walls are covered in murals, and these murals show winged people who look suspiciously like the Skypians, the Shandians, and the Birkans, living on the moon. And then the murals show these people leaving. They show them descending to the planet below, to the Verth, because their moon was running out of resources. This is not subtext. This is text. This is Oda straight up telling you that an advanced civilization existed on the moon, and they migrated to the One Piece planet in the ancient past. And here's where it gets really fun for my mind brain, because in SBS Volume 48, a reader asks Oda about the cover story, and Oda confirms that the winged people came from the moon, and that they're the ancestors of the Sky Island races. He just says it. He doesn't hedge. He doesn't play coy. He confirms that the moon people are canon and that they're connected to the main plot. Now, why does this matter? Why am I spending the first chunk of this video talking about Enel's space adventure when most of you probably want me to get to the Red Line and Fishman Island and all the juicy stuff? Because understanding the moon people is understanding the first world. The first world is the world that existed before the Void Century, before the 20 Kingdoms, before the world government, before any of the political structures we know today. And the first world was not just the ancient kingdom. That's the mistake everyone makes. When Professor Clover gives his speech in Chapter 395 during the O'Hara flashback, he talks about a great kingdom that existed in the Void Century and was destroyed by the alliance that would become the world government. And everyone latched onto that phrase, great kingdom, and started treating it like it was one nation among many. But that's a mistranslation of intent. The ancient kingdom wasn't a kingdom in the medieval sense. It wasn't one country with borders and a flag and a rival next door. It was a planetary civilization. It was the whole world. And the moon people? They were the ones who brought the technology that built it. Think about every piece of advanced technology we've seen in this series that predates the current era. Think about the poneglyphs, which are indestructible stone blocks that can only be carved by the Kazuki clan, using techniques that have been lost to time. Think about the ancient weapons, Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus, which are described as having the power to destroy the world. Think about the Void Century itself, which is a 100-year period of history that has been so thoroughly erased that even speaking about it is a crime punishable by death. All of this points to a civilization that was so advanced, so powerful, that it took a coalition of 20 kingdoms and 800 years of propaganda to erase it from memory. And where did that technology come from? The moon. The moon people came down, they brought their knowledge, they uplifted the planet, and they created the first world. A world that was unified. A world that was advanced. A world that, as I'm going to prove in the next 19 sections, was a single supercontinent with a single ocean, where all the races we now see, segregated and oppressed, fishmen, giants, Lunarians, humans, lived together. That's the first world. That's what existed before the Void Century. And Enel's cover story is the archaeological evidence. Here's the kicker, though. Oda didn't just throw this at us and move on. He's been reinforcing it. In chapter 1035, when King's backstory is revealed, we learn that he's a Lunarian, a member of a race that lived on the Red Line and could survive in any environment. And King is called a monster. He's called a relic. He's the last of his kind, hunted to near extinction by the world government. Why? Because the Lunarians are living proof of the first world. They're survivors. They're the remnants of the moon people's genetic legacy, walking around with their black wings and their fire powers, refusing to die. Same with the fishmen. Same with the giants. These aren't just fantasy races Oda threw in for flavour. They're evolutionary fossils. They're the remnants of a world where genetic diversity and biological experimentation were the norm, not the exception. The first world was built by people who came from the moon, and they didn't just build cities, they built new kinds of people. And when that world was destroyed, those people became the minorities of the second world, persecuted and erased, because their very existence is a reminder of what was lost. So when you watch Enel floating around on the moon, fighting robots and discovering ancient murals, you're not watching filler. You're watching the first chapter of the Book of Genesis for the One Piece planet. You're watching the moment Oda pulls back the curtain and says, by the way, this story is bigger than you thought. This story starts in space, and if you ignored it because it was a cover story, then you missed the entire foundation of the narrative. But don't worry. That's what I'm here for. That's what this whole video is for. To take you through the three worlds step by step, piece by piece, until you understand that Luffy isn't just trying to find treasure. He's trying to undo a planetary crime that's been ongoing for 800 years. He's trying to turn the second world into the third. And it starts with understanding that the first world began on the moon. But you let me know what you think so far in the comments, because we're just getting started. Now that we've established that the first world has extraterrestrial origins, we need to address the single biggest misconception in the entire One Piece fandom. And it's a misconception that even the smartest analysts fall into, because the language itself is working against us. When people talk about the Void Century, they talk about the ancient kingdom. They say things like, the ancient kingdom fought against the 20 kingdoms, or the ancient kingdom was destroyed by the alliance. And grammatically, that makes sense, right? One kingdom versus 20 kingdoms. A war between nations. A geopolitical conflict. Except that's not what happened. That framing is fundamentally wrong. And it's wrong because we've been translating Oda's intent through a lens that doesn't fit the actual evidence. The ancient kingdom wasn't a kingdom. It was the world. It was the entire planet. And the Void Century wasn't a war between nations. It was a war between a unified global civilization and a coalition of breakaway states who wanted to shatter that unity and rebuild the world in their own image. Let me take you back to chapter 395, the Ohara flashback, one of the most important chapters in the entire series. Professor Clover, the head of Ohara's scholars, is standing in front of the 5 elders via Denden Mushi, and he's giving them his findings about the Void Century. He's been researching the poneglyphs, piecing together fragments of the lost history, and he's reached a conclusion. He says, and I'm paraphrasing here because the official translation is a little clunky, that there was once a great kingdom that existed during the Void Century, and this kingdom was destroyed by the alliance that would become the world government. The 5 elders immediately order his execution. CP9 shoots him. Ohara burns, the scholars die, and the fandom takes Clover's speech and runs with it, building entire theories around this great kingdom, as if it were one nation-state among many, as if it had borders and a capital and a rival empire next door. But here's the thing. Clover never says it was just one kingdom. He says it was a kingdom that posed a threat to the entire world order. He says its ideas were so dangerous that the 20 kingdoms had to unite to destroy it. And then, 800 years later, the world government is still so terrified of this kingdom's existence being revealed that they'll burn entire islands to keep it secret. Does that sound like a normal geopolitical rival to you? Does that sound like one country that lost a war? Or does that sound like a planetary ideology that had to be erased from existence because even the memory of it was too dangerous to allow? Here's where it gets even better. Fast forward to Egghead, to Vegapunk's message in chapters 1113 through 1115. Vegapunk, the smartest man alive, the guy who's been studying the Void Century independently, records a message that's broadcast to the entire world after his death. And in that message, he confirms that the world is sinking. He confirms that sea levels have been rising for centuries. He confirms that the Void Century involved a massive global catastrophe, not just a war. And then he says something that should have made every single reader sit up and scream, but most people just glossed over it. He says the world used to be different. He implies that the geography itself has changed. He doesn't say a kingdom fell. He says the world was altered. The planet was reshaped. And if you combine Clover's speech with Vegapunk's message, the picture becomes crystal clear. The ancient kingdom wasn't a kingdom. It was the dominant global civilization. It was the first world. And the 20 kingdoms didn't conquer it. They broke it apart. They shattered the unity, flooded the planet, and built the second world on top of the ruins. Now, I know some of you are thinking, okay, but Clover specifically uses the word kingdom, so how can you say it wasn't a kingdom? And that's a fair question, except you're forgetting that Clover is a scholar working with incomplete information. He's piecing together fragments from poneglyphs that were written by the losing side of the conflict. He's using language that makes sense to him, language that fits the political structures he understands. But just because he calls it a kingdom doesn't mean it was a kingdom in the traditional sense. Think about how we use the word kingdom in English. We say animal kingdom, we say the kingdom of heaven. These aren't literal monarchies with kings and borders. They're taxonomic categories. They're conceptual frameworks. And I would argue that when the poneglyphs refer to the ancient kingdom, they're referring to a planetary order, a unified civilization, not a single nation-state. The translation is technically correct, but the connotation is wrong. And Oda knows this. He knows that the language is tricking us. And that's why he keeps dropping hints that the scope of the conflict is planetary, not regional. Let's talk geography for a second, because this is where the evidence gets really fun. In the current world of One Piece, the planet is divided by the Red Line, a massive continent-spanning mountain range that runs vertically across the entire globe, and the Grand Line, a horizontal belt of chaotic seas. These two structures divide the world into 4 quadrants: North Blue, South Blue, East Blue, and West Blue. The Grand Line itself is further divided into Paradise and the New World. This is the geography we know. This is the Second World. But here's the question nobody asks. Why is the geography like this? Why is there a perfectly vertical continent that just happens to divide the planet into neat little sections? Why is there a horizontal ocean that just happens to be the most dangerous place on the planet, filled with magnetic anomalies and sea kings and weather that makes no meteorological sense? The answer is that this geography is not natural, it's artificial, it's engineered. And the engineering happened during the Void Century, when the First World was destroyed and the Second World was built. I'm going to spend entire sections later in this video proving that the Red Line is artificial, that the calm belts are weaponized, that the Grand Lines and magnetic chaos is a remnant of ancient technology. But for now, just sit with the implications. If the geography of the planet was artificially created, then the War of the Void Century wasn't just a political conflict, it was a terraforming event. It was the literal reshaping of continents and oceans. And if the 20 kingdoms had the power to reshape the planet, then the civilization they were fighting against must have had that power first. The ancient kingdom must have been a planetary civilization with planetary scale technology. It must have been the first world. And when it fell, the 20 kingdoms didn't just erase its history. They erased its geography. They took a unified planet and shattered it into pieces, building walls and barriers and segregated seas so that no one could ever unify it again. That's the Void Century. That's the crime. And that's why the world government is so terrified of anyone learning the truth. Because the truth isn't just embarrassing. It's geological. It's written into the shape of the planet itself. So when Clover talks about a great kingdom, he's not wrong. He's just working with limited vocabulary. He's describing a planetary civilization using the language of nation-states, because that's the only framework he has. But the actual evidence, the poneglyphs, the geography, Vegapunk's message, all of it points to the same conclusion. The first world wasn't a kingdom among kingdoms. It was the world. And the second world is what the 20 kingdoms built after they destroyed it. So we've established that the first world was a planetary civilization with moon-based origins and technology so advanced that it took 800 years of propaganda to suppress. But here's the problem with ancient history. It's abstract, right? We're talking about poneglyphs and cover stories and scholar speeches. We're talking about things that happened centuries ago in a world that no longer exists. And I know some of you are sitting there thinking, okay, cool theory, but where's the proof? Where's the physical evidence that this first world was real and not just Oda doing world building for fun? And that's a completely fair question. So let me answer it with the most direct evidence possible. The proof is walking around right now. The proof is alive. The proof is every single minority race in the One Piece world. Because these aren't just fantasy species fictional pirate creator man threw in to make the world feel exotic. They're living fossils. They're evolutionary remnants of the first world's biological engineering projects. And the fact that the world government is actively hunting them to extinction is not random persecution. It's covering up evidence. Let's start with the Lunarians, because King's backstory in chapter 1035 is one of the most quietly horrifying revelations in the entire series. King is introduced as Kaido's right-hand man, this mysterious masked figure with black wings and the ability to generate fire from his body. And for the longest time, we don't know what he is. We just know he's strong, he's loyal to Kaido, and he refuses to take off his mask. Then we get his flashback. We see him as a child, imprisoned in Punk Hazard by the world government, being experimented on by scientists who are trying to figure out how his biology works. And the key detail, the detail that should make your mind-brain explode, is what the scientists say about him. They call him the last of the Lunarian race. They say his people used to live on top of the Red Line, in the place that is now Mary Joyce, before the world government took over. They say Lunarians could survive in any environment. Bur, naiwi wa for shifav, en ein ail brild, gestion my house das, vain andaten vaimasace. They were hunted to near extinction because the world government wanted them gone. And then, casually, almost as an afterthought, they mentioned that there's a bounty on Lunarian information. Not on King specifically. On any information about Lunarians. The world government is paying people to report sightings of a race that's already functionally extinct. Why? What could a dead race possibly threaten? The answer is that Lunarians are proof. They're proof that the Red Line used to be inhabited. They're proof that before Mary Joyce was the seat of world power, it was something else. And most importantly, they're proof that the current world order is built on top of a previous one. Think about what we know about Lunarian biology. They have black wings, like the moon people in Enel's cover story. They generate fire naturally, which implies some kind of advanced metabolic process that doesn't exist in normal humans. They can survive in any environment, which suggests genetic engineering or evolutionary adaptation on a massive scale. These are not traits that evolve naturally in a species over time. These are traits that are designed. And if the Lunarians were designed, then who designed them? The answer is the First World. The moon people came down, they brought their technology, and they started experimenting with biology. They created the Lunarians as an adapted race, possibly as guardians or labourers or something else entirely. And when the First World fell, the Lunarians became inconvenient. They became walking evidence of a previous era. So the world government hunted them down, drove them to extinction, and built their capital on top of the place where the Lunarians used to live, as if to say, this land was always ours. There was nothing here before us. Except there was. And King is the proof. Now let's talk about the Fishman, because Fishman Island is an entire arc about racism, and most people watch it and think Oda's doing a metaphor for real-world discrimination, which he absolutely is. But it's also more literal than that. Fishmen are not just an oppressed minority in the thematic sense. They are genetically distinct. They are a separate species from humans, capable of breathing underwater, with strength 10 times that of a normal human, with biological traits that make zero evolutionary sense unless you assume they were engineered. Think about it. Fishmen have human-level intelligence, human-level culture, human-level society, but they also have gills and the ability to communicate with fish and amphibious biology. How does that happen naturally? How does a species evolve to be perfectly adapted to both land and sea unless someone sat down and said, let's make people who can do both? And before you say, well, maybe they just evolved that way over millions of years, let me remind you that fishmen and humans can interbreed. Kokoro, the old lady from Water 7, is half fishman, half human. That's canon. Chapter 3. 122. And if fishmen and humans can produce viable offspring, that means they're genetically compatible, which means they're not separate species in the evolutionary sense. They're variants. They're modifications. They're what happens when you take baseline human DNA and add aquatic traits on purpose. Good. I'm building the case for genetic engineering. Now I need to hit giants and the 3-Eye tribe. then tie it all together. I'm at about 850 words, so I have room for 400 more to hit my target. Let me continue with giants, then three-eye tribe, then synthesis. And it's not just fishmen. Look at the giants. Elbaf is an entire nation of people who are literally 50 times larger than normal humans, and they live for 300 years. 300 years. That's not normal biology. That's not something that evolves in a population unless there's massive selective pressure, or more likely, unless someone engineered it. And the giants have been around for centuries. They have their own culture, their own history, their own warrior traditions. They're not newcomers. They're old. They're remnants. And the world government doesn't hunt them the way they hunt Lunarians, probably because giants are too strong and too numerous to eradicate easily, but the government also doesn't integrate them. Giants are kept at arm's length, used as mercenaries and warriors, but never given real political power. Why? Because like the fishmen and the Lunarians, giants are evidence of a world that used to be different. They're evidence of a time when biological diversity wasn't a threat. It was the norm. And then there's the three-eye tribe, which is the most fascinating case of all because we barely know anything about them, and yet what we do know is terrifying. Pudding, Big Mom's daughter, is revealed in chapter 853 to be part of the three-eye tribe. She has a third eye on her forehead that she keeps hidden because people mock her for it. And Big Mom specifically wanted Pudding because she believes that a fully awakened three-eye can read the poneglyphs, not translate them, like Robin does with her knowledge of the ancient language. Read them. Directly. As if the three-eye tribe has some kind of biological compatibility with ancient technology. And if that's true, if the three-eye tribe was specifically designed to interface with poneglyph systems, then they're not just a race. They're a tool. They're a living key to the First World's knowledge, and the fact that they've been nearly wiped out is not an accident. It's a feature. The world government doesn't want anyone reading the poneglyphs, so they eradicated the race that could do it naturally. So here's what I'm saying. Every single minority race in One Piece, every group that's persecuted or marginalized or hunted, is a living fossil from the First World. They're the remnants of a civilization that practiced large-scale genetic engineering, that created biological diversity, as a matter of course, that built people for specific purposes and environments. Lunarians for high altitude or extreme environments, fishmen for aquatic environments, giants for heavy labor or warfare, three eyes for knowledge preservation. And when the First World fell, these races didn't disappear. They survived. They adapted. They became the others of the Second World, the minorities, the freaks, the targets. And the world government didn't persecute them out of random bigotry. They persecuted them because their very existence is proof that the current world is a lie. Every Lunarian, every fishman, every giant, every three-eye is a walking contradiction to the idea that the world government has always ruled, that the current order is natural, that this is how things have always been. And so the government has spent 800 years trying to erase them, either through direct extermination, like with the Lunarians, or through systemic oppression, like with the fishmen, or through cultural suppression, like with the giants. Because if people started asking questions about where these races came from, they might start asking questions about what the world looked like before. And that's a question the world government cannot allow. This is why I said at the beginning that you need to wipe your mind-brain clean. Because once you see these races as living fossils, once you understand that they're not just fantasy window dressing, but actual evidence of a previous world, the entire story shifts. This isn't a story about pirates versus marines. It's a story about a planetary crime and the survivors who refuse to die. And Luffy, whether he knows it or not, is collecting those survivors. His crew has a fishman. His allies include giants. His enemies include the last Lunarian. He's rebuilding the coalition of the First World one person at a time, and when he finally finds the One Piece and learns the truth, he's going to have an army of living evidence standing behind him. So we've talked about the living evidence. Now let's talk about the written evidence, because this is where things get psychologically fascinating. The poneglyphs are presented to us, especially early in the series, as this incredible achievement. They're indestructible, stone blocks that contain the true history of the world, carved by the Kozuki clan, using techniques that have been lost to time. When Robin first explains them in chapter 301, she talks about them with reverence. She says they're scattered across the world, that they contain fragments of the void century, that finding and translating them is the only way to learn the truth. And the fandom treats them the same way. We talk about poneglyphs like they're this badass final message from a civilization that knew it was going to lose but wanted to make sure the truth survived. Like they're a triumph of defiance. The ancient kingdom went down swinging, carving their history into indestructible stone so that one day, centuries later, someone would find them and expose the world government's lies. That's the narrative we've been sold. And it's wrong. The poneglyphs are not a triumph. They're a confession. They're an admission of failure. And the fact that they exist at all is proof that the ancient kingdom lost the war long before the final battle. Let me explain what I mean. The poneglyphs are indestructible, right? That's their whole thing. Chapter 3, 95. Clover mentions it explicitly. The stones cannot be destroyed. The world government has tried for 800 years to erase them, and they can't. They can only suppress the knowledge of how to read them by killing anyone who learns the ancient language. But here's the question nobody asks. If the ancient kingdom had the technology to create indestructible stone, why did they need to? Why would you carve your history into stone that can't be destroyed unless you already knew that everything else was going to be destroyed? Think about the logistics of this. The poneglyphs are massive. They're heavy. They're scattered across the entire world, hidden on random islands, buried in ruins, placed in locations that are deliberately hard to reach. That's not the behavior of a civilization that's winning. That's the behavior of a civilization that's losing and knows it. That's the behavior of people who are watching their cities burn, watching their technology fail, watching their unity collapse, and they're scrambling to preserve something, anything, before it's all gone. And it's not just that they made the poneglyphs. It's when they made them. Because if you actually pay attention to the timeline, the poneglyphs were created during the Void Century, not before it. They're not records of a thriving civilization documenting its achievements. They're emergency measures created during a catastrophe. The Kozuki clan, the family that carved them, didn't do it as a public service. They did it because someone, probably the leaders of the ancient kingdom, came to them and said, "Everything is falling apart. We need you to carve our history into stone before it's too late." And the Kozuki clan did it. They carved the poneglyphs, scattered them across the world, and then they went into hiding for 800 years, passing down the knowledge of the ancient language in secret, because they knew that if the world government found out they could still read the stones, they'd be exterminated. Which, by the way, is exactly what happened to Odin. Chapter 3, 97. Odin is executed specifically because he travelled with Roger, because he reached Laugh Tale, because he learned the truth. The world government doesn't kill him for being a samurai or a daimyo. They kill him because he's a Kozuki, and the Kozuki are dangerous. Now let's talk about what's actually written on the poneglyphs, because this is where the confession angle becomes undeniable. Most of the poneglyphs we've seen contain historical information. They talk about the Void Century, about the ancient kingdom, about the weapons. But there's one poneglyph that's different, and it's the one that proves my entire point. Chapter 6, 49, Fishman Island. Robin reads the poneglyph in the sea forest, and it's not a historical record. It's a letter. It's a personal apology from Joy Boy to the ancient princess of Fishman Island, who we later learn was the Poseidon of that era. Joy Boy is apologizing because he failed to keep a promise. He was supposed to do something involving the Noah, something that would have brought the fishmen to the surface, and he couldn't do it. He failed. And instead of just accepting that failure and moving on, he carved an apology into indestructible stone and left it on Fishman Island, knowing that one day, 800 years later, someone would read it and understand that he tried. That's not the behavior of a victorious leader. That's the behavior of someone who's drowning in guilt. And here's the thing that really twists the knife. Joy Boy's apology is on a poneglyph. That means the apology itself was considered important enough to preserve forever. That means the ancient kingdom's leaders, in the middle of losing a war, in the middle of watching their world collapse, decided that Joy Boy's personal failure was worth carving into stone. Why? Why would you waste precious time and resources on an apology unless the apology itself was part of the history that needed to be preserved? The answer is that Joy Boy's failure wasn't a personal mistake. It was a strategic decision. He had to choose between keeping his promise to Fishman Island and doing something else, something bigger, something that might save the rest of the world. And he chose the bigger thing. He sacrificed Fishman Island's future to buy time for everyone else. And the poneglyph is his way of saying, I'm sorry. I didn't abandon you because I didn't care. I abandoned you because I had no choice. That's a confession. That's not a historical record. That's a man unburdening his soul in stone because he knows he's going to die and he wants someone, anyone, to understand that he tried. But it gets worse. Because the poneglyphs aren't just scattered randomly. Some of them are road poneglyphs, and these are the ones that point to Laugh-Tale. Chapter 8. 18. The Zoo Arc. We learn that there are 4 road poneglyphs, and you need all 4 to triangulate the location of the final island. And this is presented as a puzzle, right? A treasure hunt. Find the 4 stones, plot the coordinates, reach the island, claim the one piece. But think about what that actually means. Think about the decision-making process behind scattering 4 stones across the world and making them the only way to reach the final island. That's not a treasure hunt. That's a lock. That's a fail-safe. The ancient kingdom didn't scatter the road poneglyphs because they wanted to make it fun for future pirates. They scattered them because they didn't want just anyone reaching Laugh-Tale. They wanted to make sure that only someone who was willing to travel the entire world, to unite people from every sea, to challenge the world government's authority at every step, could reach the truth. They turned finding the One Piece into a test of character, and that's not something you do if you're confident in your victory. That's something you do if you're afraid that the wrong person might find your legacy and misuse it. So here's the synthesis. The poneglyphs are not a triumph. They're a time capsule created by people who knew they were losing. They're a desperate attempt to preserve the truth in a medium that couldn't be destroyed, scattered across a world that was about to be reshaped, written in a language that would be banned, guarded by a family that would be hunted for centuries. And the fact that they exist, the fact that we're still finding them 800 years later, is not proof that the ancient kingdom was strong. It's proof that they were terrified. They were terrified that everything they built would be erased, that their ideas would die with them, that the future would forget them completely. So they carved their confession into stone and hoped that someday someone would care enough to read it. And the world government has spent 800 years proving them right, because the government is still trying to suppress the poneglyphs, still killing anyone who can read them, still terrified of what they contain. Because the poneglyphs don't just contain history. They contain evidence of a crime. They contain proof that the world used to be different, that the current order is artificial, that everything the world government claims about its legitimacy is a lie. And that's why they can't be destroyed. Because even if you burn every book, kill every scholar, erase every record, the stones will still be there, waiting for someone brave enough or stupid enough to read them. And Joy Boy's apology is the perfect microcosm of this. It's a letter to the future, written by a man who failed, preserved by a civilization that lost, read by a girl who's trying to bring the whole system down. That's not a historical record. That's a confession. That became a weapon. So let's talk about Joy Boy, because out of all the figures in One Piece history, he's the one who haunts the narrative the most. He's mentioned constantly. His name shows up in Fishman Island, in Wano, in Egghead, in Gear 5's reveal. He's connected to the poneglyphs, to the ancient kingdom, to Luffy's devil fruit, to the concept of liberation itself. And yet we know almost nothing concrete about him. We don't know what he looked like. We don't know his real name, because Joy Boy is clearly a title or a nickname. We don't know if he was human or something else. We don't even know definitively if he was the leader of the ancient kingdom or just an important figure within it. What we do know is that he made a promise to Fishman Island 800 years ago. He failed to keep that promise, and he felt so guilty about it that he carved an apology into an indestructible stone and left it in the sea forest where it would sit for 8 centuries until Robin read it out loud to a mermaid princess who didn't understand why she was crying. That's Chapter 6. 49, by the way, and if that scene didn't absolutely wreck you emotionally, I don't know what to tell you. But here's what I want to focus on: the apology itself. Because when you actually think about what Joy Boy was apologizing for, the entire moral foundation of the First World's collapse comes into focus. The promise, as far as we can piece together from context, was this: Joy Boy was going to use the Noah, that absolutely massive ship that's been sitting in the sea forest for 800 years, to bring the fishmen to the surface. He was going to fulfill some kind of ancient covenant between the surface world and Fishman Island, something that would have allowed fishmen to live on land without persecution, to integrate with the rest of the world, to stop being second-class citizens trapped 10,000 meters underwater. And this wasn't just a political gesture. This was existential for Fishman Island. Because Fishman Island, as we see it in the current era, is beautiful, but it's also a prison. It's literally underwater, in a bubble, surrounded by sea kings, accessible only through dangerous routes. Fishmen are stuck there. They're segregated there. And Joy Boy was going to fix that. He was going to bring them to the surface using the Noah, which is described in Chapter 634 as a ship so large it could carry the entire population of Fishman Island. That's not a boat. That's an ark. That's a planetary evacuation vessel. And Joy Boy promised he'd use it, and then he didn't. Now here's the question that keeps me up at night. Why didn't he? What happened that was so catastrophic, so world-endingly urgent, that Joy Boy had to break a promise of this magnitude? Because breaking a promise like this isn't a scheduling conflict. It's not, sorry, something came up. This is, I was going to save your entire species from permanent segregation, but I chose to do something else instead. What could possibly justify that? And the only answer that makes sense, the only answer that fits with everything else we know about the Void Century, is that Joy Boy had to choose between saving Fishman Island and saving everyone else. He had to choose between keeping his promise and stopping the 20 kingdoms from reshaping the planet. And he chose the planet. He chose to fight the war, to preserve the poneglyphs, to try to stop the flood or the Red Line's creation, or whatever apocalyptic event was happening. And in doing so, he condemned Fishman Island to 800 years of underwater isolation. And that's why the apology is on a poneglyph. Because Joy Boy needed future generations to understand that he didn't abandon Fishman Island out of cruelty or indifference. He abandoned them because he was making a utilitarian calculation in the middle of a planetary catastrophe. He was doing the emotional maths, as we'd call it, and the equation was brutal. Save one island or try to save the world. And he chose the world. And it didn't even work. The ancient kingdom still fell. The 20 kingdoms still won. The First World still collapsed. and Fishman Island still got left behind. So Joy Boy's sacrifice didn't save anyone. It just redistributed the suffering. And he knew it. And he carved his guilt into stone because he wanted someone, 800 years later, to know that he tried, that he cared, that the failure wasn't for lack of trying. But here's where it gets philosophically fascinating, and this is the part that I think Oda is setting up for the endgame. The apology isn't just for Fishman Island. It's for us. It's for the reader. Because when Luffy eventually fulfills Joy Boy's promise, when he destroys Fishman Island, as prophesied by Madame Shyali in chapter 610, he's going to be making the same choice Joy Boy made. He's going to have to choose between the immediate safety of people he cares about and the long-term restructuring of the world. And the difference is that Luffy is going to succeed where Joy Boy failed. He's going to destroy Fishman Island, yes, but he's going to do it in a way that forces the fishmen to the surface, that dismantles the segregation, that fulfills the original promise, even if it looks like a betrayal in the moment. And the reason he'll be able to do that is because Joy Boy left the apology. Because the apology is proof that the promise was always meant to be kept, just not in the way anyone expected. It's proof that sometimes breaking a promise is the only way to honour it. Let's talk about the Noah itself for a second, because this ship is one of the most absurd pieces of engineering in the entire series, and nobody talks about it enough. Chapter 6. 34. The Noah is described as half the size of Fishman Island itself. It's so large that when it starts moving during Luffy's fight with Hody Jones, it threatens to crush the entire island just by existing in the same space. It's powered by Sea Kings, which means it was designed to be pulled by sentient creatures who only obey Poseidon. And it's been sitting in the sea forest, unused, for 800 years, waiting for someone to fulfill its purpose. That's not a ship. That's a monument to failure. That's a physical reminder, sitting in the middle of Fishman Island, that Joy Boy didn't come through. Every fisherman who's lived for the past 8 centuries has had to look at that ship and know that they were supposed to be somewhere else. They were supposed to be on the surface. They were supposed to be free. And instead, they're underwater, in a bubble, and the ship that was supposed to save them is just sitting there, rusting, too big to move, too important to destroy. And the Sea Kings, the creatures that are supposed to pull the Noah, they're still around. They're still waiting. Chapter 6. 47. The Sea Kings talk to each other after Luffy defeats Hody, and they say something that should have made every single reader sit up and scream. They say they've been waiting for 2 monarchs to be born. They say one has already been born, referring to Shirahoshi, the current Poseidon. And they say the other will be born soon, and when both monarchs meet, the promise will finally be fulfilled. The Sea Kings aren't talking about Joy Boy and Poseidon from 800 years ago. They're talking about Luffy and Shirahoshi right now. They're saying the cycle is repeating. The promise is getting a second chance, and this time, it's going to work. But here's the thing that I think most people miss. The promise isn't just about bringing fishmen to the surface. It's about what bringing them to the surface represents. It's about ending segregation. It's about dismantling the artificial barriers that divide the world into separate seas and separate peoples. Because in the first world, there were no barriers. Fishmen lived alongside humans and giants and Lunarians because the planet was unified. And when the first world fell and the second world was built, those barriers were created deliberately. The red line went up. The seas were divided. Fishman Island was pushed underwater. And Joy Boy's promise was to undo that. To bring the fishmen back to the surface. To restore the unity that was lost. To prove that the segregation was never natural. It was always imposed. And he failed. But the promise survived. It survived in the Noah, in the poneglyph, in the Sea King's memory, in the fact that Fishman Island still exists, 800 years later, still waiting, still hoping. And when Luffy finally fulfills it, when he brings Shirahoshi and the fishmen to the surface by destroying the island that's been their prison, he's not going to be doing something new. He's going to be finishing something that started 800 years ago. He's going to be keeping Joy Boy's promise. And that's the entire point of Luffy's connection to Joy Boy. He's not Joy Boy reincarnated. He's Joy Boy's second chance. So when I say the poneglyphs are confessions, this is what I mean. Joy Boy's apology is a confession that he chose wrong, or at least that he chose hard, that he made a decision in an impossible situation and it haunted him for the rest of his life. And he left that confession for the future because he believed, or at least he hoped, that someone would come along who wouldn't have to make the same choice. Someone who would have the power, the allies, the will to actually restructure the world instead of just fighting to preserve it. And that someone is Luffy. That's the entire thematic spine of the series. Joy Boy tried to save the first world and failed. Luffy is going to destroy the second world and succeed. And the bridge between those two acts is an apology carved in stone, sitting in a forest at the bottom of the ocean, waiting 800 years for someone to read it and understand. That's the first world. That's the civilization that built miracles and then watched them crumble. That's the era of the moon people, the engineered races, the planetary unity, the desperate scramble to preserve something before it all ended. And it did end. The first world fell. The void century happened. And what rose from the ashes was something worse. The second world, the world of the Red Line and the segregated seas and 800 years of lies. And that's where we're going next. So the first world is gone. 800 years have passed. The moon people's descendants are scattered or extinct. The planetary civilization has been shattered. Joy Boy is dead. The poneglyphs are scattered. And what replaced all of that is the world we see in the manga right now. The second world. The world of the Four Blues and the Grand Line and the Red Line and the world government. The world that everyone in the story treats as natural, as eternal, as the way things have always been. Except it's not. Nothing about the geography of the One Piece planet makes sense. Nothing about it is natural. And once you start asking basic questions about how the world is shaped, the entire structure of the second world reveals itself to be artificial, engineered, deliberately constructed to keep people separated and controllable. And the most obvious piece of evidence for this, the thing that's been staring us in the face since chapter 101 when Nami first explained the world map, is the Red Line itself. Let's start with the basics. The Red Line is a continent that runs vertically across the entire planet. North to south, pole to pole presumably. It's described as being impossibly tall, impossibly long, and impossibly consistent. There are no gaps in it except for Reverse Mountain and the path that leads up to Mary Jawai's. It divides the world perfectly in half, creating the barrier between the East Blue and the West Blue on one side, and the North Blue and the South Blue on the other. And here's the thing that should immediately make your brain start screaming questions. That's not how continents work. Continents are not perfectly vertical lines. They're not consistent. They don't run pole to pole without breaking apart. Real continents are messy. They're shaped by tectonic drift, by erosion, by volcanic activity, by millions of years of geological chaos. They have peninsulas and bays and islands and gaps. The Red Line has none of that. It's a wall. It's a barrier. And barriers don't occur in nature. They're built. But let's go deeper, because it's not just the shape of the Red Line that's wrong. It's the height. Chapter 9. 06. When the Straw Hats first approach Mary Joy's, we see that the Red Line is so tall that Mary Joy's, which sits on top of it, is literally above the clouds. You have to take a bubble elevator to reach it. The elevation is described as being so extreme that the air is thinner up there. We're talking about a mountain range that makes Everest look like a speed bump. And this mountain range runs for the entire length of the planet. That's not geologically possible. Mountains that tall require specific tectonic conditions. They require continental plates colliding with each other over millions of years, pushing the crust upward in specific locations. You can't have a mountain range that tall running continuously for that distance without the planet's crust literally tearing itself apart from the stress. Unless, of course, it's not a mountain range. Unless it's something else. Now, here's where Oda starts dropping hints that most people miss because they're not thinking about geology. Reverse Mountain. Chapter 1. 1. Reverse Mountain is the entrance to the Grand Line, and it's described as a mountain where the water flows upward. 4 channels of ocean current from the 4 blues converge at the base of Reverse Mountain, flow up the mountain through canals, meet at the peak, and then pour down into the Grand Line. And when Nami first sees it, she says it's impossible. She says water doesn't flow uphill. She says this defies the laws of physics. And then the Straw Hats go through it anyway, because this is One Piece and impossible things happen every chapter. But Nami is right. Water doesn't flow uphill, not naturally, not unless something is forcing it to. And the fact that Reverse Mountain exists, the fact that it's been forcing ocean currents upward for presumably centuries, means that something about the red line structure is fundamentally artificial. It means there's a mechanism at work. It means someone built this. And then there's Mary Jawoos, which is the capital of the world government and sits directly on top of the red line at its highest point. Chapter 9. 06 through 9. 08, the Reverie arc. We get our first good look at Mary Jawoos' architecture. And it's opulent, right? It's massive palaces and gardens and the celestial dragons living in luxury. But what I want you to focus on is what's not there. There's no sign of geological instability. There's no erosion. There's no weathering. For a city that supposedly sits on top of the tallest mountain range on the planet, exposed to constant wind and rain and extreme temperature fluctuations, Mary Jawoos looks pristine. It looks maintained. And not just maintained in the sense that they have good janitors. Maintained in the sense that the foundation itself is stable in a way that natural mountains aren't. Natural mountains shift. They erode. They're dynamic. The red line is static. It's been static for 800 years. And that's because it's not a natural formation. It's a structure. Here's my thesis. And I'm going to spend the rest of this section building the evidence for it. The red line is not a mountain range that formed naturally over geological time. It's a mass grave. It's the compacted debris of the First World supercontinent, crushed and stacked and shaped by an ancient weapon during the Void Century, forming a wall that deliberately divides the planet in half. And the reason it's so tall, the reason it's so consistent, the reason it doesn't erode or shift, is because it's not being held together by normal geological forces. It's being held together by whatever technology or power was used to create it in the first place. And the world government knows this. They know the red line is artificial. They know it's a monument to the war they won. And they've spent 800 years pretending it's natural, pretending it's eternal, pretending it's always been there. Because if people knew the truth, they'd start asking what the world looked like before the wall went up. Let me give you some supporting evidence from later in the story, because Oda doesn't just drop hints about this. He straight up tells us in Egghead. Chapter 11. 13 through 11:15. Vegapunk's broadcast to the world. Vegapunk, who's been studying the Void Century independently, who has access to ancient technology, who's literally the smartest person alive, says that the world is sinking. He says sea levels are rising. He says this has been happening for centuries, slowly, incrementally, and it's going to accelerate. And then he says something that should have made the entire fandom lose their minds, but a lot of people just glossed over it. He implies that the current geography of the world is not original. He talks about the Void Century as a time when the world changed, Not just politically, physically. The planet itself was altered. And if the planet was altered during the Void Century, if the geography we see now is not the geography that existed before, then what happened? What kind of event could reshape continents and oceans? The answer is catastrophic. The answer is deliberate. The answer is the red line. Think about what a supercontinent looks like. Think about Pangaea, the real-world supercontinent that existed on Earth millions of years ago before tectonic drift broke it apart into the continents we have now. One massive landmass surrounded by one massive ocean. And now think about what the one-piece world would look like if you removed the red line. If you took that vertical wall and smashed it down, redistributed the mass, let the oceans merge. You'd have something that looks a lot more like a natural planet. You'd have continents that aren't perfectly divided by an artificial barrier. You'd have ocean currents that flow naturally instead of being forced through magical canals. You'd have a world where fishermen don't have to live underwater because the surface is accessible. You'd have the first world. And the red line is what's preventing that. The red line is the physical manifestation of the second world's segregation. It's the wall that keeps the four blues separate, that keeps the Grand Line isolated, that keeps Mary Joy's elevated above everyone else. It's not geography. It's oppression made solid. And here's the final piece of evidence that seals it for me. Fishman Island. Chapter 6. 03. When the Straw Hats first approach Fishman Island, we learn that it's located 10,000 meters below sea level, directly beneath Mary Joy's, directly beneath the red line. And the structural implications of this are insane. Fishman Island exists in a bubble at the bottom of the ocean, and above it, pressing down on it, is the entire mass of the red line. That's not a coincidence. That's not a quirk of geography. That's deliberate placement. The world government built their capital directly on top of the place where the fishermen live, as if to say, you are beneath us, literally. And the fact that Fishman Island has survived for 800 years under that pressure, in that bubble, means the bubble itself is probably artificially maintained. It means Fishman Island's current location is not where it's supposed to be. It means the fishermen were forced underwater when the red line went up, and they've been stuck there ever since. So here's the picture I'm painting. The first world had a supercontinent. It had a unified planet. And during the Void Century, the 20 kingdoms shattered that continent, took the debris, compacted it using an ancient weapon, probably Uranus or Pluton, and stacked it into a vertical wall that runs pole to pole. They created the red line. They forced the oceans to separate. They pushed Fishman Island underwater. They built Mary Joyce on top of the wall as their capital, as a monument to their victory, as a physical representation of their dominance. And they've maintained this structure for 800 years, pretending it's natural, pretending it's eternal, pretending the world has always looked like this. But it hasn't. The red line is a gravestone. It's the tombstone of the first world, and everything on top of it, every celestial dragon palace, every garden, every throne is built on the corpse of a civilization that tried to keep the planet unified and failed. And the best part? Oda's been showing us this since the beginning. Reverse mountain, the water flowing uphill, the impossible geography, Mary Joyce's stability, Fishman Island's placement, Vegapunk's message about sinking sea levels. It's all there. The red line is artificial. The second world is artificial. And when Luffy finally destroys it, when he brings the red line crashing down and reunifies the oceans, he's not going to be creating something new. He's going to be restoring something old. He's going to be turning the second world into the third. And the red line, that massive monument to segregation and oppression, is going to become rubble. So we've established that the red line is artificial, that it's a wall built to divide the planet vertically. But here's the thing about control systems. You don't build just one barrier. You build redundancies. You build overlapping layers of restriction so that even if someone gets past the first obstacle, they hit the second one and give up. And that's exactly what the Second World does. The red line divides the planet vertically, but the calm belts divide it horizontally. And just like the red line, the calm belts are presented to us as natural phenomena, as quirks of ocean currents and wind patterns. But the more you examine them, the more obvious it becomes that they're not natural at all. They're weapons. They're population control. They're the horizontal bars of the planetary prison that keeps every sea isolated from every other sea. Let's start with what we're told about the calm belts in Chapter 101, when Nami first explains the geography of the Grand Line to the crew. She says the Grand Line is bordered on both sides by the calm belts, which are regions of ocean that have no wind and no currents. Ships that enter the calm belts get stuck because their sails are useless without wind. And even if you have a ship that doesn't rely on wind, even if you have oars or a paddle steamer or whatever, you're still screwed because the calm belts are infested with sea kings, massive sentient sea creatures that attack anything that moves through their territory. So the calm belts are impassable for normal sailors, which means the only way to enter the Grand Line is through Reverse Mountain, and the only way to exit is by going all the way to the end or backtracking. The Grand Line is a one-way corridor with natural barriers on both sides. That's the official explanation. That's what every sailor in the world believes. And it's horseshit. Here's the first problem. Wind patterns don't just stop. That's not how meteorology works. Wind is created by temperature differences in the atmosphere. Hot air rises, cold air sinks. The rotation of the planet creates circulation patterns. You can have regions with less wind, sure, but a perfectly windless strip of ocean running the entire length of the planet on both sides of the equator. That's not a weather pattern. That's an anomaly. And anomalies don't persist for centuries without a cause. Real-world ocean currents and wind patterns shift over time. They're influenced by seasonal changes, by ocean temperatures, by atmospheric conditions. The calm belts don't shift. They're static. They've been in the exact same place for at least 800 years, probably longer, because the world government uses them as barriers and has clearly been doing so since their founding. And static weather patterns over geological timescales don't happen naturally. They're maintained. Now let's talk about the Sea Kings, because this is where the natural barrier excuse completely falls apart. Sea Kings are not normal animals. They're sentient. Chapter 6. 47. During Fishman Island, we see Sea Kings having actual conversations with each other. They speak in complete sentences. They have knowledge of prophecies and historical events. They talk about waiting for monarchs to be born. These are not dumb beasts acting on instinct. These are intelligent creatures with culture and purpose. And they live exclusively in the calm belts. Why? Why would an intelligent species choose to live in a region of the ocean that's completely isolated from everywhere else? That has no trade routes, that has no interaction with the rest of the world? The answer is, they didn't choose. They were put there. The Sea Kings are in the calm belts because someone placed them there to act as guardians, as living barriers, as a biological weapon system designed to keep people out. And here's the kicker. The world government knows how to bypass the calm belts. Chapter 5. 24. Impel Down Arc. We see marine warships travelling through the calm belts with impunity. They just sail right through. No wind problems, no Sea King attacks. And the explanation given is that marine ships have sea stone embedded in their hulls. Sea stone, that magical substance that emits the same energy as the ocean and makes Sea Kings ignore the ships because they can't sense them. And okay, fine, that's a clever technological solution. But here's the question nobody asks. Where did the Marines get sea stone? Where did they learn to shape it and embed it in ship hulls? Where did they develop the technology to weaponize a naturally occurring substance in such a specific way? The answer is, they didn't develop it. They inherited it. Sea stone technology is ancient. It predates the world government. And the fact that the world government has monopolized it, the fact that only marine ships are allowed to use sea stone for calm belt navigation, means they're deliberately restricting access to a technology that would allow anyone to bypass the barriers. They're keeping the world divided on purpose. But it gets even better. Chapter 5:16, we see Boa Hancock's ship, which is pulled by swimming serpents, the Yuda. And the Yuda pull the ship through the calm belts without any sea stone technology because they're sea serpents themselves, and sea kings don't attack their own kind. So there's another bypass method, another way to cross the calm belts, and it involves using creatures that are biologically compatible with the sea king population. Which raises an interesting question. If the Kujar pirates have figured out how to bypass the calm belts using sea serpents, why hasn't anyone else? Why hasn't this technique spread to other pirate crews or merchant vessels? The answer is because Amazon Lily is isolated. It's in the calm belt itself. The Kujar have access to sea serpents because they live in proximity to sea kings. Everyone else doesn't have access because everyone else is kept away from the calm belts by the sea kings. It's circular, it's self-reinforcing, and that's intentional design. So let's synthesize. The calm belts are regions of impossible meteorological stability bordered on all sides by sentient creatures who attack intruders. The only people who can bypass them are the world government, who have access to ancient technology they refuse to share, and a single isolated tribe of warrior women who live in the calm belt itself and have developed their own bypass method that relies on biological compatibility with the Guardians. Does that sound natural to you? Does that sound like a random quirk of ocean geography? Or does that sound like a system? A designed system meant to restrict movement, to prevent travel between the Four Blues and the Grand Line, to keep populations isolated and unable to communicate or organize across sea boundaries. Because that's what the calm belts actually are. They're not natural barriers. They're control mechanisms. They're the horizontal walls of the prison, and the Sea Kings are the guards. Now here's where it ties back to the First World. If the Sea Kings are intelligent, if they have knowledge of historical prophecies, if they're waiting for specific monarchs to be born so they can fulfill an ancient promise, then they're not just guardians installed by the 20 kingdoms. They're survivors. They're remnants of the First World who've been co-opted or repurposed by the Second World's architecture. Think about it. The Sea Kings obey Poseidon. That's canon. That's their entire function. They're biologically or magically bound to whoever holds the power of Poseidon, and in the First World, that was probably a normal thing. Poseidon existed as a kind of planetary manager for ocean life, and the Sea Kings were her workforce or her companions. But when the First World fell and Poseidon died, the Sea Kings didn't disappear. They waited. They've been waiting for 800 years for the next Poseidon to be born so they can resume their purpose. And in the meantime, the world government has been using them as a barrier. The government stuck them in the calm belts, probably by manipulating the ocean currents or temperature gradients to create dead zones that the Sea Kings instinctively inhabit. And now those same creatures who were supposed to help unify the planet are being used to divide it. And the Sea Stone. That's First World technology too. Sea Stone is described as crystallized ocean energy, which is the kind of nonsense pseudoscience description that screams ancient civilization bullshit. The world government didn't invent Sea Stone. They found it. They reverse engineered it. And then they weaponized it, turning it into handcuffs for devil fruit users and hull plating for their warships. But the original purpose of Sea Stone was probably completely different. It was probably a tool for interfacing with Sea Kings, for communicating with them, for managing ocean ecosystems. And the world government took that tool and perverted it into a control mechanism. They're using the technology of the First World to enforce the segregation of the Second World. That's the entire playbook. Take the tools of unity and weaponize them for division. Here's the final piece that makes this undeniable. If the calm belts were natural, if they were just random dead zones in the ocean, then they'd be a problem for the world government too. They'd restrict marine movement just as much as they restrict pirate movement. But they don't. Marines can cross the calm belts whenever they want using sea-stone ships. They can deploy forces to any of the four blues from the Grand Line. They have unrestricted access to the entire planet while everyone else is stuck in their home sea unless they risk reverse mountain. That's not a natural barrier creating equal problems for everyone. That's an engineered barrier with a built-in bypass that only the ruling class can access. That's feudalism enforced by geography. And it's been working for 800 years because nobody questions it. People just accept that the calm belts are impassable and move on with their lives, never realizing that the impassability is deliberate, that the barriers are artificial, that the world is shaped like a prison. So the red line is the vertical wall, and the calm belts are the horizontal moats. Together, they divide the planet into isolated sections where populations can't communicate, can't organize, can't compare notes about their oppression. East Blue doesn't know what's happening in West Blue. Paradise doesn't coordinate with the New World. And the Grand Line itself becomes this one-way gauntlet that filters out everyone except the strongest and most determined, ensuring that only a tiny percentage of people ever make it far enough to start asking dangerous questions about how the world is structured. It's brilliant, it's evil, and it's completely artificial. The Second World is a prison planet, and most of the inmates don't even know they're locked up. Alright, so we've established the structure of the prison. We've identified the bars, the red line dividing vertically, the calm belts dividing horizontally, sea-stone technology keeping the bypass exclusive to the world government. But we haven't talked about how the prison was built. We haven't talked about the actual mechanism of the Void Century, the event itself, the thing that transformed the First World into the Second. And here's where most people's understanding of One Piece completely falls apart. Because when you say Void Century, most fans immediately think war. They think armies and battles and swords and ancient weapons being deployed like nukes. They think it was a military conflict where the 20 kingdoms fought the ancient kingdom and won. And sure, there was fighting. Sure, there were battles. But that's not what reshaped the planet. That's not what created the Red Line and pushed Fishman Island underwater and divided the seas. You don't do that with swords. You don't do that with armies. You do that with water. The Void Century wasn't a war. It was a flood. It was a controlled, deliberate, planetary-scale flood that raised sea levels by hundreds of meters, drowned the old world, and forced the survivors to rebuild on higher ground. And the world government has been covering this up for 800 years. Because if people knew the truth, they'd realize the current geography is temporary. They'd realize the flood can be reversed. Let me start with Vegapunk's broadcast, because this is where Oda stops hinting and starts telling. Chapter 11. 13 through 11. 15. Egghead Arc. Vegapunk records a message that's transmitted to the entire world after his death. And the core of his message is this: the world is sinking. Sea levels are rising. This has been happening gradually for centuries, and it's about to accelerate. Islands are going to be submerged. Coastlines are going to vanish. Entire nations are going to disappear underwater. And Vegapunk, being the genius that he is, has figured out why. He says the sea level rise is connected to the use of the Mother Flame, which is an energy source he created by replicating ancient technology. And when the world government used the Mother Flame to power Imu's weapon and destroy Lulusia in Chapter 1060, it triggered a measurable increase in global sea levels. Not over decades, immediately. The destruction of one island caused the ocean to rise. And Vegapunk's implication is clear. This has happened before. The ancient weapons, or whatever technology the world government used during the Void Century, caused the same effect. They raised the sea levels during the Void Century by destroying landmass and converting it into ocean volume. They flooded the world on purpose. Now let's talk about what that actually means. If sea levels rose during the Void Century, if the ocean literally got deeper, then the world we see now is not the original surface of the planet. The current coastlines, the current islands, the current continental shelves, all of that is higher ground. Everything below a certain elevation drowned. And if you're thinking, okay, but how much did sea levels rise? Let me give you a number that should terrify you. Fishman Island is 10,000 meters below sea level. 10,000 meters. That's not ocean depth. That's not the natural floor of the ocean. That's elevation that used to be above water and is now submerged. Fishman Island wasn't always underwater. It was a surface city. And when the flood happened, when the sea levels rose by 200 meters or 500 meters or however high they went, Fishman Island went under. The fishmen either adapted to aquatic life using whatever genetic modifications were available in the first world, or they were already amphibious and just got forced into their secondary environment. Either way, Fishman Island's current location is not natural. It's the drowned ruins of a first world city, preserved in a bubble because the fishmen refused to abandon it even after it sank. And here's the evidence that Oda's been dropping since the beginning, that nobody connects. Ines Lobby. Chapter 375. Ines Lobby is an island that has a giant hole in the middle of it, and this hole is described as a bottomless pit that goes straight down into the ocean. And Ines Lobby never experiences night. It's in perpetual daylight, and nobody knows why. The Marines stationed there just shrug and say, "It's always been like that. It's a mystery." Probably something to do with the geography. Except it's not a mystery. It's a scar. Ines Lobby is the impact site of an ancient weapon. Someone fired Uranus or Pluton or some other planet-destroying device at that location during the Void Century, blew a hole straight through the island into the ocean below, and the destruction was so catastrophic that it altered the local atmospheric conditions permanently. The perpetual daylight is probably a side effect of the energy release, some kind of residual phenomenon that's been ongoing for 800 years. And the Marines don't investigate it, because investigating it would mean acknowledging that the island is evidence of a weapon that can punch holes through continents. It would mean acknowledging that the world government has access to that weapon. And they can't do that. So they just station their judicial headquarters on top of a geological war crime and call it a mystery. But let's get back to the flood, because Lucia is the key to understanding how this worked. Chapter 10, 60. Imu orders the destruction of Lucia using the Mother Flame-powered weapon. We see beams of light come down from the sky. We see the island get annihilated. We see it sink into the ocean. And then Vegapunk measures the sea level rise and confirms that destroying the island caused the ocean to get higher. Now think about what that means mechanologically. If destroying one island raises sea levels measurably, then destroying dozens of islands, or hundreds of islands, or an entire supercontinent's worth of landmass would raise sea levels catastrophically. And that's what happened during the Void Century. The 20 kingdoms didn't just fight the ancient kingdom, they sank it. They took the unified supercontinent of the First World, they bombarded it with ancient weapons, they shattered it into pieces, and they drowned it. The debris that didn't sink became the red line, the rest became ocean floor, and the sea levels rose by hundreds of meters, submerging coastlines, drowning cities, forcing survivors to flee to higher ground or adapt to aquatic life. And the world government has been doing everything in their power to hide this, because if people knew the flood was artificial, if they knew the current sea levels are not natural, then they'd start asking if the flood can be undone. They'd start asking if the ocean can be lowered. They'd start asking if Fishman Island can be brought back to the surface. And the answer is yes. Of course it can. The ancient weapons can terraform. They can raise continents and lower oceans. They can rebuild the world just as easily as they destroyed it. And that's what the One Piece is for. That's what Pluton and Poseidon and Uranus are for. They're not weapons of war. They're planetary reconstruction tools. And the world government has been suppressing them for 800 years, because if anyone uses them, the Second World ends. The flood reverses. The red line collapses. The seas reunify. And Mary Louise sinks into the ocean where it belongs. Think about the implications of this. Think about what it means that the world government has been sitting on the truth about sea levels for 800 years while people drown and islands disappear and nations get submerged. They know the ocean is rising. They've known the entire time because they're the ones who raised it in the first place. And instead of fixing it, instead of using the ancient weapons to reverse the flood and restore the planet, they've been using those same weapons to maintain their power. Emu destroys Lulusia with the same kind of weapon that was used to create the Second World. The government is still flooding the planet, still sinking islands, still drowning populations, because that's the only way they know how to rule. Through catastrophe, through geography, through making sure that resistance is literally impossible because everyone's too busy surviving to fight back. So when I say the Void Century was a flood, I don't mean it metaphorically. I mean the 20 kingdoms deliberately raised global sea levels by destroying continental landmass, drowning the First World civilization, and forcing the survivors into a new geography where they could be controlled. The war was just the excuse. The flood was the goal. And the Second World is what you get when you build a civilization on top of drowned ruins and pretend it's always been this way. So the Void Century was a flood. The 20 kingdoms drowned the First World. Sea levels rose by hundreds of meters. And if you want the single most obvious piece of evidence for this, if you want the smoking gun that proves Fishman Island was never supposed to be underwater, all you have to do is actually look at it. Not as a cool fantasy location with mermaids and coral towers. Look at it as a city. Look at the architecture. Look at the infrastructure. Look at the way it's designed. Because everything about Fishman Island, from the palace to the forest to the size of the Noah, screams that this place was built for the surface. It was built for air. And then it got submerged, and the fishmen have been living in a drowned city for 800 years, pretending it's normal, because they don't have any other choice. Let's start with Ryugu Palace, because the palace is the most absurd piece of evidence, and somehow nobody talks about it. Chapter 6. 12. When the Straw Hats first see Ryugu Palace, it's described as this massive, beautiful structure with towers and courtyards and gardens. And it's designed in a classical architectural style, with domes and columns and open-air spaces. Open air. Let me repeat that. Ryugu Palace has open-air courtyards. It has gardens with sunlight filtering through the water. It has balconies and terraces and spaces that are clearly designed for people to stand outside and enjoy the view. Except they're underwater. They're 10,000 meters below sea level. There is no outside to enjoy. The entire palace is encased in the same bubble that protects Fishman Island from water pressure, which means the open-air spaces are only open to the bubble's interior atmosphere. But the architecture doesn't make sense for that. The design language of Ryugu Palace is surface architecture. It's the kind of palace you build on land, on a coastline, somewhere with actual air and actual sunlight. You don't build terraces and balconies underwater unless those features were designed for a different environment. Unless the palace was built before the flood. And then there's the sea forest, which is somehow even more damning. Chapter 6. 48. The Straw Hats visit the sea forest, which is described as a graveyard for ships. It's a massive underwater forest filled with sunken vessels, and at the center of it is a poneglyph and the grave of Queen Otohime. And here's what breaks my mind. Brain. The sea forest has trees, actual trees, growing underwater at 10,000 meters of depth with no sunlight. And before you say, well, maybe there's some kind of magical underwater trees that don't need light, let me remind you that the trees are described as having leaves and roots and all the biological structures of normal surface trees. They're just submerged, which means they were already there when the island went underwater, which means the sea forest used to be an actual forest on the surface with air and sunlight and normal ecological conditions. And when Fishman Island sank, the trees died and became fossilized. And now they're just standing there at the bottom of the ocean like tombstones, marking the spot where a surface ecosystem used to exist. But the real evidence, the thing that makes it impossible to deny that Fishman Island was a surface city, is the Noah. Chapter 6, 34, we get our first good look at the Noah, and the scale of it is absolutely incomprehensible. The Noah is described as half the size of Fishman Island itself. It's so large that it can supposedly carry the entire population of Fishman Island, and it's been sitting in the sea forest, unused, for 800 years. Now let's think about this logically. Why would a city that's already underwater, that's already adapted to aquatic life, need a ship that can carry its entire population? Why would the fishermen build an ark? The answer is they didn't build it for underwater evacuation. They built it for surface evacuation. The Noah was constructed before the flood, back when Fishman Island was on the surface, as a contingency plan in case they needed to evacuate the city and relocate to a new area. And the fact that it's designed to be pulled by sea kings who only obey Poseidon means it was part of a coordinated first world disaster response system. Poseidon commands the sea kings pull the Noah evacuates the population. That's a planetary emergency protocol. And the fishermen never got to use it because the flood happened too fast, or because Joy Boy couldn't fulfill his promise in time, or because the 20 kingdoms specifically targeted Fishman Island to prevent the evacuation. Either way, the Noah is still there, still waiting, still unused. A monument to the evacuation that never happened. And here's where it gets even more tragic. The Noah is too big to leave Fishman Island. Chapter 6, 49. After Luffy damages it during his fight with Hody Jones, the Sea Kings say they can repair it, but they also say it can't be moved yet. It has to wait for the right time, for the promise to be fulfilled, for the two monarchs to meet. Which means the Noah has been trapped in Fishman Island for 800 years, unable to fulfill its purpose, because moving it would require Poseidon's command, and the current Poseidon, Shirahoshi, doesn't even know she has that power until halfway through the arc. So the ship that was supposed to save Fishman Island from the flood is now stuck underwater with the city it failed to save. And both of them are just waiting for someone to come along and finish what Joy Boy started. That's not architecture. That's a tragedy preserved in wood and stone. Now let's talk about the bubble itself, because this is the part that most people don't think about. Fishman Island exists inside a massive air bubble that's somehow maintained at 10,000 meters of depth. The bubble keeps the water out and creates an atmosphere inside where fishermen and humans can both breathe. And the explanation given is that it's created by the Yarukiman mangrove trees, the same trees that create bubbles in Sabaudi archipelago. Except Sabaudi is on the surface. The bubbles there make sense because they're rising through air and popping when they reach a certain altitude. But Fishman Island's bubble is underwater. It's not rising. It's static. It's been in the same place for centuries, maintaining a stable atmosphere against the crushing pressure of 10,000 meters of ocean. That's not a natural phenomenon. That's engineered. Someone built a system to maintain that bubble, probably using first world technology, and that system has been running continuously for 800 years without maintenance, which means the bubble is older than the flood, which means it was probably installed as a temporary measure when the island first started sinking, a stopgap solution to keep the atmosphere breathable until the evacuation could be completed. And then the evacuation never happened. Joy Boy broke his promise. The Noah stayed docked, and the temporary bubble became permanent. The fishermen have been living in emergency life support for 8 centuries. Think about what that means for fisherman culture. Think about what it does to a population to live in a drowned city, surrounded by the architecture of a surface civilization, with a giant unused ark sitting in their graveyard as a constant reminder that they were supposed to leave. The fishermen aren't just oppressed by surface worlders who treat them as second-class citizens. They're oppressed by their own geography. They're living in a tomb. Every building, every street, every structure on Fishman Island is evidence that they used to be somewhere else, somewhere better, somewhere with air and sunlight. And they can't leave because the surface world hates them, because the bubble is the only thing keeping them alive, because the Noah can't move until Poseidon gives the command. They're trapped. They've been trapped for 800 years. And the world government knows this. The government knows that Fishman Island is a drowned first world city. They know the fishermen are survivors of the flood. And instead of helping them, instead of using the ancient weapons to lower the sea levels and bring Fishman Island back to the surface, the government has been actively oppressing them, keeping them underwater, keeping them isolated. Because Fishman Island is evidence. It's proof that the current sea levels are artificial. It's proof that the world used to be different. And if the fishermen ever made it to the surface, if they ever integrated with surface society, people would start asking questions. They'd ask why an entire species was forced to live underwater. They'd ask what happened to put them there. They'd ask about the flood. And the world government can't allow that. So Fishman Island sits at the bottom of the ocean, directly beneath Mary Joyce, crushed under the weight of the Red Line, living in a bubble maintained by ancient technology, waiting for a promise that was made 800 years ago to finally be kept. And when Madame Shiali prophesies in chapter 610 that Luffy will destroy Fishman Island, she's not predicting a tragedy. She's predicting liberation. Because destroying Fishman Island, breaking the bubble, forcing the fishermen to evacuate using the Noah, is the only way to get them out of the drowned city. It's the only way to fulfill Joy Boy's promise. And when Luffy does it, when he brings Shirahoshi and the Sea Kings and the entire population of Fishman Island to the surface, he's not going to be creating a disaster. He's going to be completing an evacuation that started 800 years ago and never finished. He's going to be turning the second world back into the first, one drowned city at a time. So we've covered the vertical wall, the horizontal moats, the planetary flood, and the drowned cities. But there's one more layer to this control system, one more piece of the second world's architecture that keeps people isolated and manageable. And it's the most insidious one because it doesn't look like oppression. It looks like adventure. I'm talking about the Grand Line itself, the magnetic chaos, the unpredictable weather, the fact that you can't navigate it using normal compasses or maps or any of the tools that work in the Four Blues. Everyone treats this as flavor, as world building, as odor, making the pirate journey feel dangerous and exciting. But it's not random. The Grand Line's navigational chaos is artificial. It's weaponized first world technology that was deliberately left in place to turn the ocean into a behavioral maze, filtering out everyone except the people who are useful or controllable. Let's start with the basics. Chapter 1. 05. Crocus explains how navigation works in the Grand Line to the Straw Hats at the Reverse Mountain Lighthouse. He says normal compasses don't work because the islands have magnetic fields that interfere with magnetic needles. Instead, you need a log pose, which is a special compass that locks onto the magnetic field of the next island in sequence. You land on an island, the log pose records its magnetic signature, and after a certain amount of time, the log sets and points to the next island. And you follow that sequence, island by island, until you eventually reach the end of the Grand Line. That's the system. That's how you navigate paradise. And on the surface, it sounds like a reasonable adaptation to weird geology. Except it's not geology. It's behavioral conditioning. Think about what the log pose system actually does. It forces you to follow a predetermined route. You can't just sail wherever you want in the Grand Line. You can't chart your own course. You have to go Island A, then Island B, then Island C, in that specific order, because that's the sequence the magnetic fields dictate. And if you try to deviate, if you try to skip an island or go backward, your log pose won't work. You'll get lost. You'll drift into dead zones, or storm systems, or Sea King territory. The Grand Line punishes improvisation. It rewards obedience. It literally trains pirates to follow paths instead of forging their own. And who benefits from that? Who benefits from a system where everyone entering the Grand Line has to follow predictable routes through predictable islands? The world government. Because predictable routes are easy to monitor. They're easy to patrol. They're easy to set traps on. Now let's talk about eternal poses, because these are even more damning. An eternal pose is a log pose that permanently points to one specific island, regardless of where you are. Chapter 2. 18. Nami gets an eternal pose to Arabasta from Mr. 3. Chapter 4. 91. The Straw Hats use an eternal pose to reach Sabaody. These things exist. They're rare, they're valuable, but they exist. And here's the question. If eternal poses exist, if you can create a compass that permanently locks onto any island's magnetic signature, then why doesn't everyone just use those instead of log poses? Why bother with the sequential island hopping system when you could just get an eternal pose to Laugh-Tale and sail directly there? The answer is because you can't. There is no eternal pose to Laugh-Tale. Chapter 8. 18. Zoo Arc Inuarashi. Explicitly says that Laugh-Tale doesn't have a magnetic field you can lock onto. The only way to find it is by using the 4 road poneglyphs to triangulate its location. And that's not a natural property of the island. That's deliberate concealment. Someone, probably the ancient kingdom before it fell, used First World technology to erase Laugh-Tale's magnetic signature so it couldn't be found using the navigation systems of the Second World. They hid it from the very tools they created. Which brings us to the obvious conclusion. The magnetic fields of the Grand Line Islands are artificial. They're not natural geological phenomena. They're remnants of a First World planetary navigation network that's been corrupted or weaponized. In the First World, when the planet was unified, there was probably a global magnetic grid that helped with navigation and communication and resource distribution. Every major city or facility had a magnetic beacon, and people used those beacons to travel efficiently across the supercontinent. But when the 20 kingdoms shattered the continent and created the Second World, they didn't destroy the beacon network. They repurposed it. They turned the beacons into a maze. They configured the magnetic field so that instead of enabling free travel, they forced people into predetermined paths. They weaponized the infrastructure of unity and turned it into a tool of control. And the evidence for this is everywhere once you start looking. Wano, for example. Chapter 9. 09. We learn that Wano has been completely isolated from the outside world for centuries. It's surrounded by waterfalls and whirlpools, and there's no log pose route that leads to it. You can't reach Wano by following the normal Grand Line paths. You need either a Vivra card to guide you, or you need to physically climb the waterfalls, or you need someone who already knows the way. And this isolation isn't natural. Wano used to be connected to the rest of the world. The Kazuki clan used to interact with other nations. They carved poneglyphs that are scattered across the planet. They had diplomatic relationships with other kingdoms. But at some point, Wano was deliberately cut off. Someone removed it from the magnetic grid. Someone turned its geography into a fortress so that the Kazuki couldn't spread knowledge of the ancient language, couldn't help people read the poneglyphs, couldn't interfere with the world government's historical suppression. Wano's isolation is a feature, not a bug. It's what happens when the world government identifies a threat and uses the Grand Line's navigation system to quarantine it. But here's where it gets really twisted. The New World, the second half of the Grand Line, doesn't use log poses the same way Paradise does. Chapter 5. 94. Rayleigh explains this during Luffy's training. In the New World, the magnetic fields are even more chaotic. Islands have multiple magnetic signatures. Log poses have 3 needles instead of 1, pointing to 3 different islands simultaneously, and you have to choose which needle to follow. And the needles shake differently, depending on how dangerous the island is. More shaking means more danger. So the New World's navigation system doesn't just force you onto predetermined paths, it also gamifies danger. It turns survival into a selection mechanism. The islands that shake the most are the ones that eliminate weak crews. The islands that shake the least are relatively safe, but might not advance your position strategically. So pirates have to constantly choose between safety and progress, and the New World kills off anyone who chooses wrong too many times. It's natural selection by geography. It's a filter. And what comes out the other end? The strongest, most ruthless, most adaptable crews. The crews that the world government can then either recruit as warlords or eliminate as emperors. The New World isn't just a dangerous ocean, it's a sorting algorithm for pirates, and it's been running for 800 years. So here's the synthesis. The Grand Line is not a natural geological formation with weird magnetic properties. It's a behavioural maze built on top of a corrupted First World navigation network. The log pose system forces sequential travel along predetermined routes. Eternal poses exist, but are rare and controlled. Laughtail's magnetic signature has been erased entirely. Isolated nations like Wano are quarantined by removing them from the grid. And the New World adds a difficulty curve that filters out weak crews, ensuring only the strongest make it far enough to become threats worth monitoring. Every single aspect of Grand Line navigation is designed to control movement, predict behaviour, and eliminate resistance. It's not adventure. It's a prison with the aesthetics of freedom. And the world government is the warden. And just like the Red Line and the calm belts and the flood itself, nobody questions it. Pirates just accept that this is how the Grand Line works. They follow their log poses, they take the routes they're given, they compete to survive the New World's chaos, and they never stop to ask why the ocean is shaped like this. Why navigation is impossible without specialised tools that conveniently force you onto monitored paths. Why some islands are hidden and others are exposed. They don't ask because they don't know the world used to be different. They don't know that in the first world you could sail anywhere without magnetic compasses or sequential island hopping or danger rating needles. You could just go, and the fact that you can't do that anymore, the fact that the ocean itself has been turned into a control mechanism, is proof that the second world is artificial. It's proof that every barrier, every obstacle, every natural danger is actually engineered oppression. The first world built tools to unify the planet. The second world took those tools and weaponized them to divide it. And the Grand Line is where you can see that weaponization most clearly, because it takes the infrastructure of navigation and turns it into a maze where the only way out is through. And the only people who make it through are the ones the system has shaped into exactly the kind of threats it knows how to handle. That's the second world. That's 800 years of planetary scale gaslighting, where the world government convinces everyone that the prison is natural, that the walls are mountains, that the moats are just ocean, that the magnetic chaos is just geology. And it's all a lie. Every single piece of it. The red line is debris. The calm belts are guarded. The flood was deliberate. Fishman Island is a tomb. And the Grand Line is a maze. The second world is not the world. It's a crime scene. And we're all living in it. So we've spent the last hour plus dissecting the crime. We've examined the first world that was destroyed, the second world that was built on its ruins, the planetary flood, the artificial geography, the weaponized infrastructure. We've established that the current world is a prison. And now we need to talk about the man who's going to break it. Not because he's a revolutionary, not because he's trying to overthrow the government, but because he made a promise to himself when he was 7 years old, and that promise is so fundamentally incompatible with the structure of the second world that fulfilling it will require him to literally reshape the planet. I'm talking about Luffy's dream, his real dream, the one he's told exactly 3 people in the entire series, and every single time he says it out loud, the people who hear it react with shock, laughter, and then immediate support, and we still don't know what it is. Chapter 585. Luffy is a child on Dawn Island, sitting with Ace and Sabo, and he tells them his dream. We don't hear what he says because Oda blacks out the dialogue, but we see Ace and Sabo's reactions. They laugh. They think it's ridiculous. They think it's impossible. And then Sabo says, "I like it." Fast forward to Chapter 1. 1010 arc. Luffy tells Yamato his dream during a flashback to his childhood. Same reaction. Yamato laughs, calls it crazy, and then immediately decides she wants to join his crew. Chapter 10. 60. Post 10, Luffy finally tells his current crew his dream while they're celebrating. We still don't hear the words, but we see the straw hats react. They're shocked. Robin covers her mouth. Usopp falls over. Jinbei looks stunned. And then, after a beat, they all smile and support him unconditionally. 3 times Oda has shown us this dream being revealed. 3 times he's hidden the actual words. And 3 times the reaction has been the same. Initial shock at the absurdity, followed by total acceptance. So what could it be? What dream is so ridiculous that it makes people laugh? So ambitious that it shocks even the Straw Hats, and so fundamentally Luffy that everyone who hears it immediately understands it's genuine. Here's what we know for certain. Roger had the same dream. Chapter 9. 68 during the flashback to Roger reaching Laugh-Tale, Oden writes in his journal that Roger said something that made Whitebeard and Oden laugh, and Oden notes that it was the same thing Luffy said. So Roger's dream and Luffy's dream are identical, word for word. Which means this isn't just Luffy being random. This is a dream that's been passed down. Or more accurately, it's a dream that certain people arrive at independently because of who they are. Roger figured it out. Luffy figured it out. And when both of them said it out loud, people laughed because it sounds impossible. But here's the thing. Roger made it to Laugh-Tale. Roger learned the true history. Roger found the One Piece. And after seeing all of that, after learning what the world used to be and what it could be again, Roger's final words were, "I left everything in one place." He didn't say the dream was impossible. He said he put the means to achieve it somewhere people could find it, which means the dream is achievable. It just requires destroying the current world to make it happen. So what is it? What's the dream? I'm going to tell you what I think it is. And I want you to understand that this is not wild speculation. This is inference based on everything we know about Luffy's character, about the themes of the series, about the structure of the first and second worlds. Luffy's dream is to throw a party. A massive party. The biggest party in the world. A party where everyone is invited. And I mean everyone. Every person from every sea, every race, every nation, all together in one place, eating and drinking and celebrating together. No barriers, no borders, no segregation. Just one planet, one people, one party. And the reason people laugh when they hear this is because it's childish, it's absurd, it sounds like something a 7-year-old would say. I want to throw a party with everyone in the whole world. But it's also profound, because if you actually think about what that would require, if you think about the logistics of getting everyone in the world to one location, you realize it's impossible in the current geography. You can't have a party with everyone when the planet is divided into 4 seas by the red line and the calm belts. You can't invite fishermen when they're trapped 10,000 meters underwater. You can't gather people when the Grand Line is a one-way maze that kills most people who enter it. To throw a party with everyone, you'd need to remove the barriers. You'd need to unify the planet. You'd need to destroy the second world and create the third. And Luffy doesn't know this. That's the beautiful part. Luffy has no idea that his dream requires planetary reconstruction. He doesn't understand the geopolitics, or the history, or the artificial geography. He just knows he wants everyone to party together. And when he finds out that the world is structured to prevent that, he's going to tear the structure down. Not because he's trying to be a revolutionary, not because he understands the implications, but because the barriers are in his way, because the red line is preventing the party, and Luffy removes obstacles. That's what he does. He doesn't negotiate with them or work around them. He punches them until they break. And when he punches the red line, when he uses the ancient weapons to sink it and reunify the seas, he's not going to be thinking about the First World or Joy Boy's promise or the geopolitical ramifications. He's going to be thinking about the party, about getting everyone together. And that's why he's the protagonist. Because his motivation is so pure, so simple, so fundamentally human, that it bypasses all the complexity and cuts straight to the solution. The world needs to be unified. Luffy wants to throw a party with everyone. Same result, different reasoning. Now let's talk about why this makes sense thematically. One Piece is a story about freedom. That's the core theme. Luffy values freedom above everything else. He doesn't want to rule people. He doesn't want power. He doesn't want wealth. He wants to be free, and he wants everyone else to be free. And what is freedom in the context of the second world? It's the ability to go anywhere without barriers, to cross oceans without checkpoints, to live wherever you want without segregation, to associate with whoever you want without racial hierarchies. The second world denies all of this. The red line is a physical barrier to freedom of movement. The calm belts restrict travel. Fishman Island's underwater isolation is forced segregation. The Grand Line's magnetic maze controls where you can go. The entire planet is designed to limit freedom. And Luffy's dream, his desire to throw a party with everyone, is the ultimate expression of freedom. It's saying, I don't care about your borders. I don't care about your walls. I want everyone together, and I'm going to make it happen. That's not just freedom for himself. That's freedom for the entire planet. And achieving it requires destroying every barrier the second world has erected. Roger understood this. That's why he laughed when he reached Laugh Tale. He laughed because he finally understood the scope of what needed to be done. And it was so absurdly ambitious, so impossibly difficult, that all you could do was laugh. He laughed because the solution to all the world's problems was a child's dream. A party, unity, everyone together. And he laughed because he knew he couldn't do it himself. He was dying. He didn't have the power or the time or the ancient weapons or the allies. But he knew someone would come along who did. Someone who would have the same dream, who would gather the right people, who would stumble into the right circumstances, who would be too stubborn and too free to accept the world as it is. And that someone is Luffy. Roger left the One Piece as a detonator. Luffy is the spark. And when they meet, when Luffy finds what Roger left behind, the second world ends and the party begins. So, When I say Luffy's dream is to destroy borders, I mean it literally. The red line is a border. The calm belts are borders. Fishman Island's underwater isolation is a border. And Luffy is going to tear them all down, not because he's trying to fulfill some ancient prophecy or because he's politically conscious, but because he wants everyone at his party and the borders are in the way. That's the third world. That's what comes next. And it starts with understanding that the most powerful force in this series is not an ancient weapon or a devil fruit or a prophecy. It's a child who wants everyone to party together and refuses to accept a world that makes that impossible. So, Luffy's dream requires planetary unification. But here's what's brilliant about Oda's storytelling. He didn't just give the protagonist a dream that necessitates destroying the second world. He gave that same structural requirement to other members of the crew, disguised as personal goals that seem completely unrelated. And the most obvious example is Sanji. Because when Sanji talks about finding the All Blue, when he describes this legendary ocean where fish from all four seas gather in one place, most people treat it like a fantasy location, like Atlantis or El Dorado, some mythical place that exists somewhere on the current map if you just search hard enough. But that's not what the All Blue is. The All Blue isn't a place you find. It's a planet you create. It's what happens when you remove the barriers dividing the oceans and let the seas merge back into one. The All Blue is the third world's ocean. And Sanji's dream, just like Luffy's, is literally impossible to achieve without destroying the red line. Let's go back to the beginning. Chapter 56, the Barati arc. Sanji explains his dream to Luffy. He says the All Blue is a legendary sea where fish from the North Blue, South Blue, East Blue, and West Blue all gather. It's a chef's paradise because you can find any ingredient in one location. And when Luffy asks where it is, Sanji admits he doesn't know. Nobody knows. It's a legend. Some people think it exists. Some people think it's a myth. But Sanji believes in it because Zeph told him about it. And Zeph doesn't lie about important things. So Sanji dedicates his life to finding this place, this ocean that contains everything. And here's the question nobody asks. How would such a place exist? How do you get fish from four separate seas to gather in one location when those seas are divided by the red line and the calm belts? The answer is you don't. Not in the current geography. The All Blue can't exist while the planet is segmented. Which means if the All Blue is real, if it's not just a myth, then it's not describing a location in the second world. It's describing a state of being. It's describing what the ocean looks like when it's unified. Think about ocean currents and marine biology for a second. Fish species are distributed based on water temperature, salinity, current patterns, and geographical barriers. The red line is a geographical barrier that runs the entire length of the planet, preventing species from the East Blue and West Blue from interacting with species from the North Blue and South Blue. The calm belts are additional barriers, preventing mixing between the Grand Line and the four blues. So in the current world, you have isolated marine ecosystems. Fish from the East Blue never encounter fish from the West Blue unless a human catches them and transports them. There's no natural gathering point where all four seas marine life converges. It's biogeographically impossible. Unless, of course, the barriers didn't always exist. Unless there was a time when the ocean was one unified body of water, when marine life could migrate freely across the entire planet. When currents flowed naturally without being disrupted by artificial continents and weaponized dead zones. In that world, in the first world, there would have been regions where currents naturally converged, where nutrient upwellings attracted species from across the entire ocean, where a chef could theoretically find ingredients from everywhere, because everywhere was accessible. That's the All Blue. That's what the first world's ocean looked like. And Sanji's dream is to find it again. But here's what makes this devastating. Sanji doesn't know the all blue requires destroying the world. He thinks he's looking for an island or a region or a specific set of coordinates. He doesn't understand that what he's looking for is a geological state that hasn't existed for 800 years. And when he finally learns the truth, when he discovers that finding the all blue means sinking the red line and reunifying the seas, he's going to have to make a choice. Does he give up his dream because the cost is too high? Or does he support Luffy in tearing down the barriers, knowing that it will cause catastrophic changes to the world's geography and potentially kill millions? And here's the thing. We already know what Sanji will choose. Because Sanji's dream isn't just about being a great chef. It's about finding a place where everything exists together, where nothing is separated, where the barriers that divide the world don't apply. That's the same dream as Luffy's party. That's the same dream as Joy Boy's promise to Fishman Island. It's unity. And Sanji's going to choose unity over stability, just like Luffy will, just like the entire crew will, because that's what the Straw Hats do. They remove barriers. Now let's talk about Fishman Island again, because this is where Sanji's dream and the geography intersect in the most obvious way. Chapter 6. 04. When the Straw Hats are approaching Fishman Island, they pass through a trench in the ocean floor, and Sanji notices something. He sees fish species that he's never seen before. Deep-sea variants, bioluminescent creatures, things that only exist at extreme depths. And he gets excited because these are ingredients he's never cooked with, species that don't exist in surface waters. But here's the implication. Fishman Island's marine ecosystem is unique because it's isolated. It's 10,000 meters down. The species there have adapted to pressure and darkness and cold that surface fish can't survive. Which means if Fishman Island were brought to the surface, if the bubble were broken and the city were evacuated and the fishermen were forced to migrate upward, their ecosystem would change. The deep-sea species would either adapt or die. The marine biodiversity that's currently isolated at depth would mix with surface species. And that mixing, that collision of ecosystems that have been separated for 800 years, is what creates the all blue. It's not a place, it's a process. It's what happens when barriers break and everything merges. And Oda's been hinting at this since the beginning. Reverse Mountain, the place where the currents from all four blues converge before flowing into the Grand Line. Chapter 1. 01, Nami describes it as an impossible phenomenon where four separate ocean currents flow upward, meet at a peak, and then pour down together. That's not how water works. That's not natural. But it's also a miniature version of what the all blue would be. A place where all four seas touch. Where the waters mix, even if only temporarily. Reverse Mountain is a preview. It's Oda showing you that when the barriers are removed, when the seas are allowed to flow together, they converge naturally. And if Reverse Mountain is artificial, if it's maintained by ancient technology, as I've argued, then it's a remnant of First World infrastructure that was designed to demonstrate planetary unity. It's a monument to what the ocean used to look like before the red line went up and the calm belts were installed. It's proof that the all blue existed, and it's waiting for someone to restore it. Let me give you one more piece of evidence that seals this. Chapter 9. 67. The flashback to Roger reaching Laugh Tale. The Roger pirates are celebrating, they're laughing, they've learned the true history, and Odin is writing in his journal. And he mentions that they learned what the world was like before the Void Century. He doesn't give details, but the implication is clear. The crew now understands how the geography has changed. They know about the flood, about the Red Line's construction, about the artificial barriers. And we know Sanji's dream parallels Roger's crew because Kazuki Toki, who was on Roger's ship, tells Odin that she's been searching for something connected to the old world. She's been time-travelling forward through the centuries, looking for a specific era. And when she reaches Laugh Tale with Roger, she stops searching. She decides that this era, this generation, is the one where it finally happens, where the old world is restored, which means Roger's crew understood that the All Blue is real, that it existed in the past, and that someone in the future will recreate it by undoing the changes of the Void Century. So Sanji's dream isn't separate from Luffy's. It's the same dream wearing a chef's hat. Luffy wants everyone together at a party. Sanji wants all fish together in one ocean. Both require the barriers to come down. Both require the red line to sink. Both require the seas to merge. And when that happens, when Luffy fulfills his promise and Sanji achieves his dream simultaneously, the third world begins. One planet, one ocean, one people. And somewhere in that unified sea, there will be a region where the currents converge and the marine life gathers, and a blonde chef stands on the deck of a ship crying because he finally found it. He finally found the All Blue. And it was never a place. It was always a future. It was always the world his captain was building, one broken barrier at a time. So, we've established that Luffy and Sanji's dreams both require planetary reunification. But here's where the rubber meets the road, where the theory becomes prophecy, where Oda stops hinting and starts telling you exactly what's going to happen. Fishman Island is going to be destroyed, not by the world government, not by some external villain, by Luffy. The protagonist is going to fulfill an 800-year-old promise by obliterating an entire nation, and it's going to be presented as a good thing, as liberation. And if that sounds insane to you, if you're sitting there thinking, there's no way Oda would have his hero commit what looks like genocide, then you haven't been paying attention to what Fishman Island actually is. It's not a nation, it's a prison. It's a drowned city suspended in a bubble at the bottom of the ocean, and the only way to free the people trapped inside is to break the bubble and force them to leave. Madame Shayali saw this. She saw Luffy standing in the ruins of Fishman Island with its buildings destroyed and its bubble shattered. And everyone treated it like a curse, like a tragedy waiting to happen. But it's not a curse. It's a rescue operation that's 8 centuries overdue. Chapter 6. 10. Madame Shayali's prophecy. She's a shark mermaid who can see the future, and her predictions are never wrong. She sees visions and they come true. No exceptions. No wiggle room. And she sees Luffy destroying Fishman Island. She sees him standing in the ruins, surrounded by destruction, and she's horrified. The entire arc treats this prophecy as this looming threat. This terrible thing that might happen if Luffy isn't careful, and Luffy's response is perfect. He doesn't deny it. He doesn't promise to be careful. He just says, so what? He says if it happens, and he'll deal with it when the time comes. Because Luffy doesn't understand yet what the prophecy actually means. He doesn't know that destroying Fishman Island is the only way to save it. But Shayali does. Or at least her visions do. Because prophecy in One Piece isn't about fate. It's about inevitability based on character. Shayali sees Luffy destroying Fishman Island because that's what Luffy does when people he cares about are trapped. He breaks the cage. And Fishman Island is a cage. Let's talk about what destroying Fishman Island actually means, because I don't think it means genocide. I think it means exactly what it sounds like. Destroying the infrastructure, shattering the bubble, collapsing the buildings, making the location uninhabitable, forcing everyone to evacuate. And the tool for that evacuation already exists. It's been sitting in the sea forest for 800 years, waiting for this exact moment. The Noah, the massive ark that's half the size of the island, designed to carry the entire Fishman population, pulled by sea kings who only obey Poseidon. Luffy doesn't need to kill anyone. He needs to make staying impossible. He needs to break the bubble so catastrophically that the fishmen have no choice but to board the Noah and leave. And when they do, When Shirahoshi commands the Sea Kings to pull the ark to the surface, Joy Boy's promise will finally be fulfilled. Not the way it was supposed to happen 800 years ago. Not as a peaceful transition, but as an emergency evacuation during a planetary restructuring event. The fishmen will reach the surface. They'll be forced to integrate with surface society. And Fishman Island, the drowned city, the underwater tomb, will be abandoned, left behind, destroyed. And that's not a tragedy. That's freedom. Now here's the part that's going to make this even more complicated. The prophecy doesn't say Fishman Island will be destroyed by accident. It doesn't say Luffy will destroy it while fighting someone else. It shows him standing in the ruins, implying deliberate action, which means Luffy is going to choose to do this. He's going to make the decision to shatter the bubble, knowing it will force an entire population to flee their homes. And the only way that's morally defensible, the only way that's consistent with Luffy's character, is if staying in Fishman Island is more dangerous than leaving. If the alternative to evacuation is death. And we already know what that alternative is. The world government. Emu. The same weapon that destroyed Lulusia in chapter 1060. If the government decides Fishman Island is a threat, if they decide the fishmen know too much or are supporting the wrong people or are just in the way, they'll use the ancient weapon and sink the island permanently. They'll kill everyone, and Luffy's destruction, Luffy's forced evacuation, becomes the lesser evil, becomes the trolley problem. Let the fishmen stay in their doomed underwater city and wait for the government to annihilate them, or destroy the city yourself and force them to survive somewhere else. And this ties directly back to Joy Boy, because this is the exact same choice Joy Boy had to make 800 years ago. He had to choose between keeping his promise to Fishman Island and fighting the larger war. He chose the war. He sacrificed Fishman Island's immediate safety for the chance to save the rest of the world, and he failed. The ancient kingdom fell anyway. Fishman Island stayed underwater anyway, and Joy Boy carved his apology into stone because he knew the choice he made was morally ambiguous at best. But Luffy's going to make the same choice and succeed where Joy Boy failed. He's going to destroy Fishman Island, force the evacuation, and then he's going to use that forced migration as the catalyst for bringing down the entire second world. Because once the fishmen are on the surface, once they're integrated with surface populations, there's no going back. The segregation is broken, the barrier is shattered, and the world government can't put them back underwater without admitting that the underwater isolation was deliberate in the first place. Let me give you the narrative structure of how I think this plays out. The final war begins. The world government targets Fishman Island, either as a strategic move or because they've discovered Shirahoshi is Poseidon and they want to eliminate her before she can be used. Luffy sees the threat. He realizes the bubble won't protect them, that staying means death. So he makes the call. He tells Shirahoshi to command the Sea Kings to prepare the Noah. He tells the fishmen to evacuate. And then, because the bubble is held together by ancient technology that might fail slowly or incompletely, he destroys it himself. He punches through it, or he uses Gear 5 to shatter it. Or he does something absurdly Luffy-like that makes the bubble collapse catastrophically. The city floods. The architecture crumbles. Fishman Island as a location ceases to exist. And while it's happening, while buildings are falling and coral towers are breaking, the entire population boards the Noah. Shirahoshi commands the Sea Kings. They pull the ark upward through 10,000 meters of ocean. And when they break the surface, when the fishmen see the sky for the first time in 8 centuries, Madame Shiali's prophecy is fulfilled. Luffy destroyed Fishman Island, and he saved everyone. The moral complexity here is what makes it brilliant. Because Luffy's not going to agonize over this decision. He's not going to sit there weighing the ethics of forced displacement versus genocide. He's going to see his friends in danger and remove the danger by removing the location. That's it. That's the whole calculation. and the fishmen are going to hate it. At least initially, they're going to mourn their home. They're going to grieve for the city they've lived in for generations. Some of them are going to blame Luffy, are going to see him as the villain who took their home away. And Luffy's not going to defend himself. He's not going to explain the greater good or the historical necessity. He's just going to say, "I'm sorry," and mean it, the same way Joy Boy meant his apology 800 years ago. Because the choice is still brutal even when it's correct. The fact that destroying Fishman Island is the only way to save the fishmen doesn't make the destruction less painful. It just makes it necessary. And here's the final piece that makes this undeniable: the Noah's damage. Chapter 6. 49. After Luffy fights Hody Jones inside the Noah, the ship is damaged. Luffy punches holes in it during the battle, and the Sea Kings say they'll repair it, but it's not ready to be moved yet. It has to wait for the right time. And the implication is that the right time is when Shirahoshi fully awakens as Poseidon, when she can command the Sea Kings to do large-scale tasks, when the promise can finally be fulfilled. But there's another implication. The Noah was damaged by Luffy. The ship that's supposed to save Fishman Island was hurt by the man who's prophesied to destroy Fishman Island. And instead of this being a contradiction, it's foreshadowing. Because Luffy breaking the Noah during a fight is a preview of Luffy breaking Fishman Island during a rescue. He's not going to be gentle. He's not going to carefully orchestrate a peaceful evacuation. He's going to smash through the problem with overwhelming force. And the collateral damage is going to be catastrophic, and it's going to work. The Noah will be repaired. The fishmen will survive. And Fishman Island will be gone. That's the prophecy. That's what Madame Shayali saw. Not a villain destroying a city, not a tragedy, but a hero making an impossible choice and living with the consequences. And when it happens, when Luffy stands in the ruins of Fishman Island, surrounded by shattered coral and broken buildings and the empty space where a civilization used to be, he's going to be keeping a promise that was made 800 years ago. He's going to be finishing what Joy Boy started. And the Third World is going to begin with the evacuation of a drowned city that should never have been underwater in the first place. So Fishman Island gets destroyed, the fishmen evacuate to the surface, and the segregation starts breaking down. But that's just one city. That's one population. We still have the Red Line standing. We still have the calm belts dividing the seas. We still have the Second World's geography choking the planet. And to undo all of that, to actually transform the Second World into the Third, you need power on a planetary scale. You need tools that can reshape continents and redirect oceans and alter the fundamental structure of the world. You need the ancient weapons. Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus. The three legendary devices that are described as having the power to destroy the world. Except that's not what they do. That's not what they were built for. The ancient weapons aren't weapons. They're terraform engines. They're planetary reconstruction tools designed by the First World to manage large-scale environmental changes. And the fact that the world government has been using them as bombs for 800 years is the most perfect encapsulation of everything wrong with the Second World. They took the tools of creation and turned them into instruments of destruction. Let's start with Pluton, because we actually know the most about it structurally. Chapter 3. 99. Water 7 Arc. We learn that Pluton is a battleship. Not just any battleship, but a vessel so powerful that a single shot from its cannon can destroy an entire island. And the blueprints for Pluton have been passed down through generations of shipwrights in Water 7, hidden and protected. Because if those blueprints fell into the wrong hands, someone could build another Pluton and use it to annihilate nations. And Tom, the legendary shipwright, tells Frankie that the blueprints were preserved not to build Pluton, but to build a counter-weapon in case the original Pluton was ever awakened and used for evil. So the entire framing of Pluton is as a weapon of mass destruction, a doomsday device, a ship that exists to destroy islands. Except that framing makes no sense when you think about why anyone would build it. Why would the first world, a unified planetary civilization with advanced technology and presumably peaceful intentions, build a warship capable of destroying islands? What would they use it against? They're the dominant civilization. They're not fighting other nations because there are no other nations. The planet is unified. So who's the enemy? And the answer is, there is no enemy. Pluton wasn't built to destroy islands in warfare. It was built to destroy islands for geological management. Think about what we know about the Void Century. The sea levels rose. Continental landmass was shattered and rearranged. The Red Line was constructed from debris. All of this requires moving massive amounts of earth and stone. And how do you move earth and stone on a planetary scale? You break it apart, you transport it, you reshape it. Pluton is a mobile demolition and construction platform. It's designed to fire extremely powerful shots that can shatter geological formations, and then, presumably, it has other systems for gathering that debris and repositioning it. The single shot destroys an island capability isn't for war, it's for mining, it's for terraforming, it's for saying we need to move this island over there, so let's break it into manageable pieces first. And the blueprints exist as a failsafe, not because the First World was paranoid about their own technology, but because they knew Pluton was a tool that could be misused. They knew that in the wrong hands, a ship designed for planetary reconstruction could be turned into a weapon. So they built in a countermeasure. They made sure the knowledge to build a second Pluton survived so that if the first one was ever weaponized, someone could build a defensive version and stop it. That's forward-thinking engineering. That's a civilization that understands the dual-use nature of powerful technology. And what happened? The 20 kingdoms found Pluton, or found the knowledge of how to use it, and they turned it into exactly what the First World feared. They used it as a weapon. They used it to destroy the ancient kingdom's cities during the Void Century. And then, after they won, they hid Pluton away in Arabasta, buried it under the desert in Chapter 397, and made sure nobody could ever use it again. Because they didn't need a reconstruction tool. They needed the planet to stay broken. Now let's talk about Poseidon, because this one's even more obvious. Poseidon isn't a device. It's a person. It's a mermaid princess who's born once every few centuries with the ability to command sea kings. And we know the current Poseidon is Shirahoshi, revealed in Chapter 649. She can talk to sea kings, she can give them orders, and when she fully awakens to her power, she'll be able to command them on a massive scale, directing them to do tasks that would normally require fleets of ships or advanced machinery. And the series presents this as dangerous, as a power that could destroy the world. Because if Poseidon commands the sea kings to attack, they could sink islands, destroy navies, cause tsunamis. They're living weapons. Except, again, why would the First World create a biological system for commanding sea kings if the purpose was destruction? What's the tactical advantage of using giant sea creatures as weapons when you already have advanced technology? The answer is, there is no tactical advantage. Poseidon wasn't created for war. Poseidon was created for ocean management. Think about what sea kings actually are. They're massive, intelligent creatures that live in the calm belts and deep ocean. They're part of the planetary ecosystem. And if you're a civilization trying to manage a unified ocean, trying to maintain shipping lanes, trying to prevent overfishing or ecological collapse, you need a way to communicate with the largest marine predators. You need someone who can negotiate with them, who can direct their movements, who can say, don't attack ships in this region, or migrate to this area where the food supply is better, or help us move this heavy object underwater. That's what Poseidon is for. She's a planetary ocean manager. She's the interface between human civilization and marine ecology. And the fact that she can command Sea Kings to attack is a side effect of the core function, not the intended purpose. It's like saying a construction crane is dangerous because you could use it to drop things on people. Sure, you could. But that's not what it was built for. And the Sea Kings themselves support this interpretation. Chapter 6. 47. During Fishman Island, the Sea Kings have a conversation where they talk about waiting for two monarchs to be born. They talk about Poseidon and Joy Boy, or rather, the modern equivalents of those figures. And they're not waiting to destroy anything. They're waiting to fulfill a promise. They're waiting to move the Noah. They're waiting to complete a task they were supposed to do 800 years ago, but couldn't because Joy Boy failed. The Sea Kings are infrastructure. They're biological machinery left over from the First World, and they've been waiting for 8 centuries to resume their original function, which is helping people, moving populations, managing ecosystems, not attacking islands. The world government fears Poseidon because they know that if she awakens, if she commands the Sea Kings to obey her instead of staying in the calm belts, the entire navigational control system of the Second World collapses. The barriers stop working, the moats drain, and people can move freely. And then there's Uranus, which we know the least about, but we've seen it in action. Chapter 10. 60. Emu uses what appears to be Uranus to destroy Lulusia. Beams of light come from the sky, the island is annihilated, and Vegapunk measures the sea level rise. And if Uranus is an orbital weapon, if it's stationed in the sky or in space and fires down at the planet, then what's its original purpose? What would the First World use a satellite-based energy weapon for? And the answer is the same pattern. Planetary management. Uranus isn't a weapon. It's a power distribution system. It's a satellite that beams energy down to the surface to power cities, or to terraform landscapes, or to provide light and heat to regions that need it. And yes, if you concentrate all that energy into a single point, you can use it to destroy an island. But that's the misuse, not the design. The First World probably used Uranus to provide clean energy to the entire planet. The world government uses it to delete nations that displease Emu. Same tool. Opposite morality. So, here's the synthesis. The ancient weapons are terraform engines. Pluton reshapes landmass. Poseidon manages oceans and marine life. Uranus provides or redistributes energy. Together, they're a planetary reconstruction toolkit designed to maintain and modify the environment on a massive scale. And when the First World fell, when the Void Century happened, these tools were used in reverse. Pluton shattered the supercontinent instead of building it. Poseidon's Sea Kings were turned into barriers instead of helpers. Uranus destroyed cities instead of powering them. The 20 kingdoms took the infrastructure of unity and weaponized it for segregation. And now, 800 years later, Luffy's going to find these weapons and use them correctly. He's going to use Pluton to sink the Red Line. He's going to use Poseidon to clear the calm belts. He's going to use Uranus to power the reconstruction. He's going to terraform the planet back into the First World's configuration. And the world government is terrified of this, not because the weapons are dangerous, but because they're about to be used for their intended purpose. And their intended purpose is antithetical to everything the Second World stands for. So we've got the tools. We've got Pluton for reshaping landmass, Poseidon for managing oceans, Uranus for energy distribution. We've got a protagonist whose dream requires planetary unification, and a crew whose individual goals all point toward the same structural change. We've got prophecies about destroying Fishman Island and evacuating populations and breaking barriers, but we're still missing the trigger. We're missing the thing that actually starts the process, the device or knowledge or mechanism that takes all these scattered pieces and says, now, this is when it happens. And that trigger is the One Piece itself. Not treasure, not gold, not a pile of wealth that Roger left behind. The One Piece is a literal object, a physical device, probably a control system or activation key for the ancient weapons. And when Luffy finds it and uses it, The third world begins. The red line collapses. The seas merge. Mary Joy sinks into the ocean, and the entire planetary prison that's been maintained for 800 years comes crashing down in what is probably going to be the most spectacular sequence of geological destruction ever depicted in manga. Let me start with what we know for certain about the One Piece. Chapter 5, 76, Marineford, Whitebeard's final speech before he dies. He's been fatally wounded. He knows he's about to go, and he uses his last breath to declare to the entire world, the One Piece is real. Not might be real. Not, I believe it exists. Real. Definitive. Whitebeard knows this for a fact because he sailed with Roger, because he was Roger's rival and friend, because he's one of the only people alive who could have reached Laugh-Tale if he'd wanted to. And he says the One Piece is real, and when you find it, the world will be turned upside down. He says someone will eventually claim it, and when they do, a war will engulf the world. Not a metaphorical war, not an ideological conflict, an actual war. Because the One Piece will challenge the world government's authority so fundamentally that they'll have no choice but to fight to destroy it. And the only way that makes sense, the only reason the government would be that threatened, is if the One Piece is not just knowledge, it's capability. It's the thing that lets you use the ancient weapons. It's the detonator. Now let's go to chapter 968, the flashback to Roger reaching Laugh-Tale. Roger and his crew arrive at the final island. They see whatever's there and they laugh. They laugh so hard they cry. They laugh so hard they can barely stand. And Roger says, "What a funny treasure Joy Boy left behind." Funny, not tragic, not profound. Funny. And when you combine that with Oden's journal entry, where he describes the One Piece as something that will make sense to people in the future, the picture becomes clear. The One Piece is absurd. It's ridiculous. It's so over the top in its ambition and its mechanism that the only appropriate response is laughter. Because Joy Boy, the man who failed to save the first world, the man who broke his promise to Fishman Island, the man who died with his civilization, left behind a device that will literally undo everything the 20 Kingdoms built. He left behind a geological reset button, and it's been sitting on Laugh-Tale for 800 years, waiting for someone to push it. Here's what I think the One Piece is. Structurally, it's a control interface for the ancient weapons. Probably a central hub or activation system that was built by the First World as a failsafe in case the planet ever needed to be reconstructed after a catastrophe. Think about the logic. You've got a planetary civilization with advanced technology, and you know that catastrophes can happen. Asteroids, climate collapse, war, whatever. So you build a system that can terraform the planet back to a habitable state if everything goes wrong. You build Pluton to reshape landmass, Poseidon to manage oceans, Uranus to distribute energy. And you build a central control system that activates all three simultaneously, ensuring coordinated planetary reconstruction. And you hide that control system in a location that's deliberately hard to reach, that requires navigating the entire world, that tests the character of whoever finds it. Because you don't want just anyone having access to planet reshaping power. You want someone who's proven they can unite people, who values freedom, who won't misuse the tools. And you hide it so well that even after your civilization falls, even after 800 years of searching, the only people who find it are the ones who deserve it. That's what Laugh-Tale is. It's not just an island. It's a vault, a repository. And inside that vault is the control system for the ancient weapons. Probably with instructions or a recording from Joy Boy explaining what happened during the Void Century and what needs to be done to fix it. And when Roger found it, when he saw the mechanism and understood the scope of what it would do, he laughed because it was perfect. It was exactly the kind of solution Joy Boy would leave behind. Childish, ambitious, impossible, and completely sincere. Joy Boy's treasure isn't wealth. It's a second chance. It's him saying, "I failed, but you don't have to." Here's everything you need to finish what I started. Good luck, and sorry about the mess." But Roger couldn't use it. Chapter 9. 67. Odin writes that they were too early, that the time wasn't right yet, and Roger himself says he wishes he'd been born in the same era as whoever comes next, whoever finally claims the One Piece and uses it. Which means the One Piece has conditions. It requires something Roger didn't have. Probably Poseidon, since Shirahoshi wasn't born yet. Or maybe it requires all three ancient weapons to be accessible simultaneously, and one of them was still hidden or lost. Or maybe it requires a specific alignment of political conditions. A moment when the world is ready for the change and won't immediately collapse into chaos if the geography is suddenly restructured. Either way, Roger knew he couldn't activate it, so he did the next best thing. He announced to the world that the One Piece exists. He sparked the Great Pirate Age. He created a competition that would eventually produce someone capable of claiming it. He turned his death into a recruitment drive for his successor. And then he waited, knowing that someone would come along who had everything he lacked. Now let's talk about what happens when the One Piece is activated. When Luffy finds Laugh Tale, when he sees the control system, when he understands what it does and decides to use it. Because this isn't going to be subtle. This isn't going to be a political transition or a diplomatic solution. This is going to be geological apocalypse. The One Piece activates the ancient weapons simultaneously. Pluton fires on the red line, shattering it at key structural points. The continent that's been dividing the planet vertically for 800 years cracks, crumbles, and begins to collapse. Poseidon commands every Sea King in the ocean to move to specific locations, probably to pull debris or to create currents that help redistribute the collapsing landmass. Uranus provides energy, maybe to power Pluton, or to stabilize atmospheric conditions during the chaos. And Mary Juaz, the capital of the world government, the city built on top of the Red Line as a monument to the 20 Kingdoms' victory, slides into the ocean. The celestial dragon's palaces, the Pangaea castle, the empty throne where Imu sits, all of it sinks, drowns, gets reclaimed by the sea that was raised to build their empire, and Fishman Island rises. Because when the Red Line collapses, when the debris settles, the ocean currents will shift, the pressure at depth will change, and the location where Fishman Island sits directly beneath Mary Juaz will become accessible. The 10,000-meter depth will become surface level, or close enough that the bubble is no longer necessary. The fishermen will evacuate shore because Luffy will destroy the city to force them out. But they won't be going to some random surface location. They'll be going to where Fishman Island used to be before the flood. They'll be going home, and the symmetry is perfect. The oppressor's capital sinks while the oppressed city rises. Mary Joy's drowns while Fishman Island surfaces. The second world inverts. And the third world, the unified planet with one ocean and one people, begins. This is why the world government fears the One Piece. Not because it's treasure they want to claim. Because it's a device that will destroy their empire, literally, by dismantling the geography that makes their rule possible. The Red Line isn't just a continent. It's the foundation of their power. It's the physical manifestation of segregation and control. And the One Piece will remove it, will erase it, will turn 800 years of carefully maintained planetary architecture into rubble. And there's nothing they can do to stop it except prevent anyone from reaching Laugh Tale, which is why they've spent centuries hunting people who get too close, which is why they erase the Void Century from history, which is why they kill anyone who can read poneglyphs. Because if people knew what the One Piece actually does, if they knew it was real and achievable and would literally reshape the world, every oppressed population on the planet would be racing to find it. Roger laughed because he understood the joke. The greatest treasure in the world isn't treasure. It's a demolition device for the world's greatest prison. And Joy Boy left it there, knowing someone would find it. someone who wanted freedom badly enough to break the planet to get it. That's the One Piece. That's the third world's trigger. And Luffy's going to pull it without hesitation, because when you show Luffy a cage, he doesn't ask permission to break it. He just does. And the third world begins. So the One Piece exists. The ancient weapons are waiting to be used correctly. Luffy's going to find the trigger and pull it. The third world is coming. But here's the question that's been haunting the series since Drum Island. Since chapter 154. When Dr. Kureha looked at Luffy and said, D, eh? They're still around? What is the D? What does it mean? Why do certain people have this letter in their name? And why does the world government lose their minds whenever they hear it? Why did Rosinante tell Law in chapter 764 that the D clan are the natural enemies of the gods? Why do people with D in their names keep showing up at crucial historical moments, fighting against authority, refusing to bow, dying with smiles on their faces? And the answer that most people land on is some vague notion of destiny or inherited will or ancient bloodlines. But that's not what the D is. The D is a job posting. It's a recruitment mechanism. It stands for dawn, yes, but not in a poetic sense. In a literal sense. The D clan are the people who've been genetically, ideologically, or circumstantially selected to restart civilization when the current world ends. They're not heroes. They're custodians. They're the ones who carry the torch through the collapse and light it again on the other side. Let's start with what we know about people who have D in their names. Monkey D. Luffy, Gold D. Roger, Portgas D. Ace, Trafalgar D. Waterloo, Jaguar D. Saul, Marshall D. Teach, Rox D. Zibek. Every single one of them is someone who challenges the status quo in fundamental ways. Every single one of them is a threat to the world government's authority. And it's not because they're all good people, because the mayor not. Teach is a villain. Zibek was apparently so dangerous that even mentioning his name is taboo. But they all share one characteristic. They refuse to accept the world as it is. They push against boundaries. They reject limits. They want something more, something different, something that the current structure can't provide. And that trait, that fundamental dissatisfaction with the second world, is what marks them as D-carriers. It's not genetic in the traditional sense. It's ideological inheritance. It's a way of thinking that gets passed down through families or cultures or personal conviction. And it says, this world is wrong, and I'm going to do something about it. Chapter 3. 97. O'Hara flashback. Jaguar D. Saul is a giant who deserts from the Marines because he can't stomach what they're doing to the scholars. And before he dies, he tells Robin to keep living, to find friends who will protect her, because the will of D will bring about a new era eventually. He doesn't know what that era looks like. He doesn't know how it happens. But he knows that people with D in their names are connected to it. They're the ones who carry the possibility of change. And then, decades later, Robin joins Luffy's crew, and she's the only person in the world who can read poneglyphs, who can unlock the true history, who can provide Luffy with the knowledge he needs to find the One Piece. Saul didn't know Robin would meet Luffy specifically, but he knew the D clan would produce someone like Luffy, someone who values freedom enough to fight for it, someone who gathers people across racial and national boundaries, someone who, intentionally or not, is building the coalition that will transition the world from the second to the third. Now let's talk about Roger, because Roger is the proof of concept. Chapter 5. 77 Sengoku reveals that Roger's full name is Gold D. Roger, and the world government deliberately changed it to Gold Roger to hide the D. They didn't want people connecting him to the larger pattern of D carriers throughout history. They wanted him to be just a pirate, just a criminal, not a symptom of something bigger. And Roger understood this. He understood that having D in his name meant something, that it connected him to Joy Boy and to the ancient history and to the people who would come after him. And when he found the One Piece, when he learned the truth, he couldn't use it himself, but he made sure the knowledge survived. He turned his execution into a broadcast. He told the world that his treasure was real and waiting for someone to find it. He sparked the Great Pirate Age, knowing that eventually another D would emerge. Someone who had what he lacked. Someone who could finish the job. And here's where it gets fascinating from a narrative structure perspective. The D clan isn't a bloodline. It's a distributed network. Look at the diversity of people who carry the D. Luffy is a human from East Blue. Law is from North Blue. Saul is a giant. Teach is whatever the hell Teach is with his weird body. Zebek was from a completely different era. There's no single family tree connecting all of them. There's no genetic marker being passed down. The D is mimetic, not genetic. It's an idea that reproduces through culture and choice. Families pass it down by teaching their children to value freedom, to question authority, to fight against oppression. But you can also acquire it, the way Law did when Rocinante saved him and told him about the D clan's history. Law wasn't born knowing what his name meant. He learned it. He chose to embody it. And that choice made him part of the network. So what does Dawn actually mean in this context? It means the people who survived the transition, the people who lived through the collapse of the Second World and helped build the Third. Because when Luffy activates the One Piece, when the Red Line collapses and the seas merge and Mary Joy sinks, there's going to be chaos, massive chaos, populations displaced, trade routes destroyed, governments toppled, and in that chaos, people are going to die. A lot of people. And the ones who survive, the ones who help others survive, the ones who organize relief efforts and build new communities and prevent the collapse from becoming total extinction, are going to be the people who embody the will of D. They're going to be the people who value life and freedom and cooperation over power and control. They're going to be the custodians of the dawn, the builders of the new world. And the D clan is the network of people who've been preparing for this moment for 800 years, whether they knew it or not. Think about what this means for Luffy specifically. Luffy doesn't care about destiny. He doesn't care about inherited will or prophecies or being chosen. He cares about his friends and his freedom and his dream. But by pursuing those things, by gathering a crew of people from every sea, by making allies with fishmen and giants and revolutionaries and former enemies, by refusing to accept any barrier that gets in his way, he's functionally recreating the coalition of the First World. He's building the network that will survive the transition. And the D in his name is both a marker and a mandate. It's a marker that he's part of the lineage of people who've been doing this work throughout history. And it's a mandate that he's responsible for seeing it through. Not because some ancient prophecy says so, but because that's what people with D do. They bring the dawn. They restart civilization. They refuse to let the world stay broken. And here's the final piece that makes this undeniable. Enemies of the gods. Rocinante tells Law that the D clan are the natural enemies of the gods. Chapter 7, 64. And who are the gods in One Piece? The celestial dragons, the world nobles, the people who live in Mary Joieuse and claim divine right to rule. The people who benefit most from the Second World structure. And the D clan are their enemies, not because of some ancient grudge, not because of bloodline revenge, but because the D clan represent the opposite world view. The gods want segregation, hierarchy, control. The D want unity, freedom, equality. The gods want the world to stay broken. The D want to fix it. And when the Third World arrives, when the dawn comes, the gods drown. Their city sinks. Their divine status evaporates. And the people who survive, who rebuild, who create the new civilization, are the ones who never accepted divinity as legitimate in the first place. That's the will of D. That's the dawn. It's not destiny. It's a job description. And Luffy's about to clock in. So the D clan are the custodians of the dawn. They're the network of people who survived the collapse and rebuild. But here's the problem with relying on a distributed network. It's decentralized. It's unpredictable. You can't guarantee that the right person will emerge at the right time with the right combination of power, allies, and motivation to actually pull the trigger on planetary reconstruction. The will of D is a safety net, but safety nets have gaps. So the First World built something else, something more direct, something that would ensure, absolutely guarantee, that when the time came, someone would have the power to liberate the world. They built a mythology. They built a religion. They built the legend of Nika, the sun god, the warrior of liberation. And then they encoded that mythology into a devil fruit, into Luffy's devil fruit, so that whoever ate it would become the physical manifestation of the legend. Nika isn't a god. Nika is propaganda. It's a mission statement that was designed 800 years ago to create liberators. And Gear 5 is what happens when propaganda becomes real. Let's start with what we're told about Nika. Chapter 1. 1018. Who's Who tells a story to Jinbei. He says Nika is a legendary figure from ancient times, a warrior who would appear to free slaves and bring smiles to people's faces. And the slaves in the ancient past prayed to Nika, hoping he would come save them. And this legend was so dangerous, so threatening to the world government, that they erased it from history. They killed people for even talking about it. Who's Who was imprisoned and tortured specifically because he mentioned Nika to a guard. The government is more afraid of this legend than they are of actual criminals. Why? Because Nika isn't just a story. It's instructions. It's a cultural program designed to propagate the idea that liberation is possible, that someone will come to break the chains, that slavery and oppression are not permanent states. And if enough people believe that, if that idea spreads far enough, it becomes self-fulfilling. People start resisting. They start hoping. They start looking for the liberator. And eventually, someone emerges who fits the pattern. Now let's talk about the devil fruit. Chapter 1. 1044, Egghead Arc. We learn that Luffy's devil fruit is not the Gomu Gomu no Mi. It's the Hito Hito no Mi, model Nika. It's a mythical Zoan that transforms the user into the sun god Nika. And the Gorodi elders, the highest authorities in the world government, are absolutely terrified when they realize it's awakened. They say the fruit hasn't awakened in 800 years. They say it's the most ridiculous power in the world. They say its very existence is a threat to their rule. And here's the key detail. They've been trying to obtain this specific fruit for centuries, and they've never been able to get it. The fruit has a will of its own. It evades capture. It chooses its users. And every single person who's eaten it throughout history has presumably been someone with the potential to challenge authority, to liberate people, to embody the mythology of Nika. So here's what I think happened. The First World created the Nika mythology deliberately as a psychological weapon against oppression. They spread stories about a sun god who frees slaves, who brings laughter, who turns liberation into a party. And they encoded those stories into a devil fruit, using whatever advanced biological or metaphysical technology they had access to, so that the fruit would seek out people who match the Nika archetype, people who value freedom, people who laugh in the face of danger, people who make friends with everyone regardless of background, people like Luffy. And when those people eat the fruit and awaken it, they gain the power to actually fulfill the mythology. They become Nika. They become the liberator the stories promised. And the world government knows this. They know that the Nika fruit is not just powerful, in a combat sense. It's powerful in a narrative sense. It creates heroes. It makes liberation contagious. Let's examine what Gear 5 actually does, because it's not just about the rubber powers or the cartoonish physics. Gear 5 makes people laugh. Chapter 1. 1045. When Luffy first awakens, the first thing that happens is he starts laughing uncontrollably. And everyone around him, allies and enemies alike, can't help but smile. They feel joy. They feel hope. Even in the middle of a battle, even while facing overwhelming odds, Gear 5 creates an atmosphere of celebration. It turns fighting into a party. And that's not a side effect. That's the point. Because liberation isn't just about breaking chains. It's about what comes after. It's about joy. It's about people being able to laugh and celebrate and live without fear. Nika's power is to make liberation feel inevitable, to make it feel like a party instead of a war, to make people believe that freedom is not just possible but approaching. That's psychological warfare on a mythological scale, and the world government can't fight it. They can't counter it. Because how do you fight hope? How do you suppress a legend that makes people smile? You can kill the person who has the power, sure. You can try to eliminate Luffy. But the fruit will just reappear somewhere else. It'll find someone else who fits the pattern. It'll create another Nika. The mythology is self-replicating, and the more the government tries to suppress it, the more they prove that it's real, that it's dangerous to them, that the liberator is someone they fear. Every execution, every cover-up, every act of censorship around Nika just reinforces the legend. It proves that the slaves' prayers were justified, that someone really is coming to free them. Now here's where it connects to everything else. The Nika fruit doesn't work alone. It's part of a system. You've got the Will of D, which creates the network of people who will rebuild after the collapse. You've got the ancient weapons, which provide the tools for planetary reconstruction. You've got the poneglyphs, which preserve the knowledge of what happened and what needs to be done. And you've got Nika, which ensures that someone with the right personality, the right powers, and the right narrative weight will eventually appear and tie all these pieces together. Luffy didn't choose to be Nika. He doesn't even think of himself that way. But he ate the fruit. He embodies the values, and now he has the power to make liberation physically manifest. He can turn his rubbery body into a force of nature. He can make his will affect reality. He can fight the entire world government and make it look like a cartoon. Because that's what Nika does. Nika makes oppression look ridiculous. And the slaves who prayed to Nika 800 years ago, they weren't praying to a god. They were praying to the future. They were praying that someone, someday, would have the power to do what they couldn't, to break the system, to liberate everyone. And the First World heard those prayers and said, okay, we'll build that. We'll create a mechanism that ensures liberation comes eventually. It might take centuries. It might take millennia. But it'll come, because we're going to encode it into the fabric of the world itself. That's what Nika is. That's what the devil fruit represents. It's the First World's promise that the Second World is temporary, that liberation is inevitable, that someone will come who has the power to make freedom real, and that someone is Luffy. Not because he's special in a chosen one sense, but because he ate the fruit that was designed to find people like him, people who laugh at danger, people who make friends with everyone, people who refuse to let their friends suffer, people who, when shown a cage, don't ask who built it or why. They just break it. That's Nika. That's the sun god. That's the mythology made flesh. And when Luffy activates the One Piece, when he uses Gear 5 and the ancient weapons simultaneously to tear down the Red Line and reunify the planet, he's not going to be fulfilling a prophecy. He's going to be completing a mission that was programmed into his devil fruit 800 years ago. He's going to be the punchline to the greatest joke the First World ever told. The joke that says, we lost, but you won't. We failed, but you'll succeed. We died, but the liberation lives on in a rubber boy who doesn't even know he's carrying our mission. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. Because we built the liberator. We encoded him. And he's coming. That's Nika. That's Gear 5. That's why the world government is terrified. Not because Luffy is strong, but because he's the proof that their rule was always temporary, that the Second World was always doomed. That 800 years ago, when they thought they'd won, the First World left behind a ticking time bomb disguised as a mythology. And Luffy just armed it. So we've got the network, we've got the mythology, we've got the tools and the trigger and the protagonist who's going to use them. But all of this is theoretical until something forces the issue. Until something happens that makes the transition from Second World to Third World not just desirable, but necessary. Not just inevitable, but urgent. And that something already happened. Chapter 10, 60, Lulusia. Imu used an ancient weapon to annihilate an entire island, evaporated it in seconds with beams of light from the sky, and caused measurable sea level rise that Vegapunk detected immediately. And most people treat this as just another villain doing villain things, just another demonstration of power to show how dangerous the final boss is. But it's not. Lulusia is a preview. It's a test run. It's Imu showing us exactly what they did during the Void Century and what they're planning to do again. And when Vegapunk broadcasts his message to the world in chapters 11, 13 through 11, 15, when he warns everyone that the sea levels are rising and islands will sink and the world is in danger, he's not making a prediction. He's starting a countdown. He's telling the world, this is happening again. The flood is coming. And if you want to survive it, you need to find the One Piece before Imu finishes what they started 800 years ago. Let's break down what actually happened at Lulusia. The island had just experienced a rebellion. King Seki was overthrown by revolutionaries. The population was celebrating their liberation. And then Imu, sitting on the empty throne in Mary Joyce, marks Lulusia on a map and orders its destruction. We see beams of light descend from the sky. We see the island get hit with overwhelming energy. We see it literally sink into the ocean. And the only survivors are Sabo, who escapes, and the people who weren't on the island at the time. Everyone else dies. An entire nation. An entire population. Erased. And the justification? None. Imu doesn't explain. The Gorosei don't question. The order is given and executed, and that's it. One island, gone, because it represented a threat to the world government's authority. Because the people there chose freedom. Because rebellion cannot be allowed to succeed, or it might spread. Now here's what makes this absolutely chilling when you understand the structure of the Void Century. Lulusia's destruction is not new. It's not unprecedented. It's standard procedure. This is what the world government does when a population becomes inconvenient. They did it 800 years ago to the entire ancient kingdom. They shattered the supercontinent. They drowned the cities. They raised the sea levels by destroying landmass and converting it to ocean volume. And they've been doing it sporadically ever since, just on smaller scales, to islands and nations that get too close to the truth or too successful at resisting. O'Hara was destroyed with a buster call. Lulusia was destroyed with what appears to be Uranus. The weapon changed. The tactic didn't. The world government maintains power by being willing to annihilate entire populations without hesitation. And Lulusia proves they still have that capability. They still have access to the ancient weapons. And they're willing to use them. But here's the part that should terrify everyone in the One Piece world. Vegapunk detected the sea level change. Chapter 11. 13. He explicitly states that the sea levels rose after Lulusia's destruction. Not by much. Not catastrophically. But measurably. which means the process is the same as the void century. Destroy landmass, convert it to ocean volume, sea levels rise, coastlines flood, populations displaced. And if Emu destroys one island and the sea level rises detectably, what happens when they destroy 10 islands? 100? What happens when they decide that the current era is too rebellious, too informed, too close to discovering the truth, and they need to do another planetary purge? What happens when they trigger a second void century? The answer is everyone drowns. Everyone except the people who live on high ground. Everyone except Mary Joyce. Everyone except the people Imu decides are worth saving. Which is how you maintain absolute control. You threaten the entire world with drowning unless they obey. And Vegapunk knows this. That's why he recorded his message. That's why he set it to broadcast after his death. Because he understands what Lulusia represents. He understands that Imu has the power to flood the world again, that the technology exists, that the precedent has been established, and he can't stop it himself because he's one man, and the world government employs him and monitors him and would kill him if he openly rebelled. So he does the next best thing. He tells everyone. He broadcasts to the entire planet that the sea levels are rising, that islands will sink, that the void century involved a similar event, that the world is in danger. He doesn't explicitly say Imu is going to flood the planet again, but he gives people enough information to figure it out. He lights the fuse. He starts the panic. He forces the issue. Because once people know the flood is coming, once they understand that their islands might be next, they're going to demand solutions. They're going to search for answers. They're going to look for the One Piece. And someone's going to find it. Now, let's connect this to Luffy. Luffy doesn't know about Lulusia yet. He doesn't know what Imu did, but he will. Eventually, someone's going to tell him that Sabo was there, that an entire island full of people who just freed themselves from a tyrant was annihilated by the world government for the crime of seeking freedom. And Luffy's going to be furious. Not in a calculated way, not in a strategic we need to plan our response way. In a visceral, immediate, those bastards killed people for being free way, and that fury is going to drive him toward Laugh Tale faster than any other motivation could. Because Luffy's dream is to throw a party with everyone. And you can't invite people who've been erased. You can't have a party when the world government is willing to sink entire islands to maintain control. So finding the One Piece stops being just about achieving his dream. It becomes about preventing the next Lulusia, about stopping Imu before they flood the world again, about using the ancient weapons defensively, reactively to counter the government's offensive use of the same tools. And here's the beautiful narrative symmetry. Imu used Uranus to destroy Lulusia and raise the sea levels. Luffy's going to use Pluton and Poseidon and the One Piece to destroy the Red Line and lower the sea levels back to where they were before the Void Century. Same tools, opposite goals. Imu wants to maintain the flood. Luffy's going to reverse it. Imu wants segregation. Luffy wants unity. Imu sinks islands that seek freedom. Luffy's going to sink the continent that enforces oppression, and both of them are going to cause massive geological chaos. Both of them are going to displace populations and destroy existing structures and reshape the planet. The difference is intent. Imu's chaos is punishment. Luffy's chaos is liberation. Imu floods to control. Luffy breaks the barriers to free. So Lulusia is the catalyst. It's the moment when the Second World's true nature becomes undeniable, when the world government reveals that they're willing to commit genocide to maintain power, when Vegapunk forces the knowledge into the public consciousness that the planet is sinking and someone needs to do something about it, and when Luffy eventually learns what happened, when he understands that the government will keep doing this, will keep erasing islands and populations and freedoms, he's going to race toward Laugh Tale with singular focus. Because every day he doesn't find the One Piece is another day Imu might destroy another island, Another Lulusia. Another population celebrating their freedom only to be vaporized for it. And Luffy can't allow that, won't allow that. So he'll find the trigger. He'll activate it. And the Third World will begin not as a planned transition, but as an emergency response. As the only way to stop the second Void Century before it drowns everyone. That's what Lulusia means. That's why Oda showed it to us. Not to demonstrate Imu's power, but to show us the stakes. To show us that the final conflict isn't ideological. It's existential. It's destroy the prison planet or watch everyone drown. And Luffy's going to choose destruction. Every single time. So here's what everyone thinks the final war is about. The Revolutionary Army thinks it's about overthrowing the world government and establishing a new political system where nations can govern themselves without celestial dragon interference. The Marines think it's about maintaining order and preventing the world from descending into chaos. The Emperors think it's about claiming territory and power. The world government thinks it's about suppressing rebellion and maintaining their divine authority. Everyone has their ideological framework. Everyone has their vision of what they're fighting for. And they're all wrong. Because the final war of One Piece is not about ideology. It's not about governance or freedom or order or power. It's about real estate. It's about whether the planet stays divided into segregated seas with artificial barriers or whether those barriers get demolished and the geography itself is restructured. It's about the red line. And every single faction, every single army, every single participant in this war is going to realize too late that they've been fighting over continental architecture, not political philosophy. Let's start with Whitebeard because he told us this explicitly and we didn't listen. Chapter 576. Marineford, Whitebeard's final speech. He's dying. He's been stabbed and shot and burned, and he uses his last words to declare to the entire world the One Piece is real, and when someone finds it, the world will be turned upside down. Not changed, not improved, turned upside down, inverted, restructured. And then he says, and this is the part everyone forgets, that someone will eventually challenge the world government to a massive war, a war that will engulf the entire world, a war that will shake the very foundations of the planet. And Sengoku, standing there, listening, is terrified. Not because Whitebeard is revealing military secrets, but because Whitebeard is confirming that the final conflict is inevitable and that it will be catastrophic on a scale the current era can't comprehend. Because Whitebeard knows what the One Piece does. He sailed with Roger. He could have claimed it himself if he'd wanted to. And he chose not to because he understood the cost. He understood that finding the One Piece means triggering planetary reconstruction. Means starting a war that's not about who rules, but about what the planet looks like when the war ends. Now let's talk about Doflamingo, because he also saw this coming and framed it perfectly. Chapter 7. 61. Dressrosa. Doflamingo's speech to Law about the celestial dragons and the throne wars. He says the current era is a farce, that the celestial dragons are sitting on a throne built on a lie, and that eventually someone's going to pull the tablecloth and the whole thing will come crashing down. He talks about the empty throne, about how it's supposed to represent equality among nations, but actually represents the 20 Kingdoms' dominance. And he laughs because he knows it's all temporary. He knows the throne isn't empty. Imu sits there, and he knows that when people find out, when the lie is exposed, there will be a war for control of that throne. But here's what Doflamingo doesn't understand. The throne doesn't matter. Mary Jawese doesn't matter. Political control doesn't matter. Because the throne is sitting on top of the red line, and when the red line collapses, the throne goes with it. The war isn't for the throne. The war is about whether the throne's foundation continues to exist. And then there's Sabo and the Revolutionary Army, who think they're fighting a political revolution. Chapter 1. 83. Sabo's introduction. The Revolutionary Army wants to overthrow the world government, wants to liberate oppressed nations, wants to create a world where people can govern themselves. And that's a noble goal, right? That's a clear ideological position. Except it's based on the assumption that the current geography is permanent, that you can just change the government and keep everything else the same. But you can't, because the world government's power isn't just political, it's geographical. The red line isn't just a continent, it's the enforcement mechanism for their authority. It's the thing that keeps East Blue separated from West Blue, that keeps the Grand Line isolated, that keeps Mary Joyce elevated above everyone else. And you can't overthrow a government that has geological dominance without addressing the geology. You can storm Mary Joyce, you can kill the celestial dragons, you can burn down the palaces. And the red line will still be there. The calm belts will still be there. The segregation will still be there. And eventually, someone else will claim the high ground and rebuild the same system. The Revolutionary Army thinks they're fighting a political war, but they're going to realize, probably too late, that they needed to fight a geological war. Sabo discovers this at the Reverie. Chapter 1. 83 through 185, we see him infiltrate Mary Joyce, and he sees something that shocks him so badly he has to report it immediately to Dragon. And we don't know exactly what he saw, but the implication is that he discovered Emu, or the Empty Throne's occupant, or evidence of what the world government is really doing with the ancient weapons. And if Sabo saw any of this, if he saw the weapon that destroyed Lulusia, or the mechanisms that maintain the red line, or the truth about the flood, then he knows now that the Revolutionary Army's goals are insufficient, that overthrowing the government isn't enough, that you have to destroy the architecture, and that's going to force the Revolutionary Army to choose. Do they stick with their political ideology and fight a war they can't win, or do they align with Luffy, who doesn't care about politics but will absolutely destroy the red line because it's in the way of his party? Here's the synthesis. The final war is going to look like a massive ideological conflict. It's going to have the Revolutionary Army fighting the world government, the emperors fighting for territory, the Marines trying to maintain order, various kingdoms choosing sides. It's going to look like a traditional war with armies and strategies and political objectives. But underneath all of that, the real conflict is simpler. It's keep the planet divided or reunify it. Keep the barriers or destroy them. Maintain the second world or create the third. And most of the participants won't even realise that's what they're fighting about until the moment Luffy activates the One Piece and the red line starts collapsing. And then, in that moment, all the political factions, all the ideological positions, all the carefully planned strategies become irrelevant. Because when continents are sinking and oceans are merging and Mary Joyce is sliding into the sea, your political philosophy doesn't matter. Your allegiance doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is whether you're standing on ground that's about to disappear or ground that's going to rise. Whitebeard said the world would be turned upside down. Doflamingo said the throne would fall. Sabo discovered that the government has world-ending weapons. And they're all describing the same event from different angles. They're all seeing pieces of the same truth. The final war is about real estate. It's about planetary architecture. It's about whether human civilization continues to be segregated by artificial geography or whether those barriers are demolished and people are forced to live together on a unified planet. And Luffy's going to answer that question by punching the red line so hard it crumbles. Not because he understands the geopolitical implications, but because the red line is preventing his party. Because you can't invite everyone to one place when the planet is divided by an artificial continent. So the continent has to go. And when it does, when Pluton fires and Poseidon moves the oceans and Uranus provides the energy and the whole system activates simultaneously, every faction in the war is going to realize they were fighting for the wrong thing. They were fighting over who gets to rule when they should have been fighting over whether the current world deserves to exist at all. That's the final war. That's the conflict Whitebeard predicted. Not ideology versus ideology. Real estate versus real estate. The architecture of oppression versus the dream of unity. And Luffy doesn't even know he's fighting that war yet. He just knows some bastards kill people for being free, and he's going to find the treasure his predecessor left behind and use it to make sure that never happens again. And the treasure is a demolition device, and the war is a property dispute. And the third world begins when Luffy wins the argument by removing the property entirely. So, we've spent the last 2+ hours walking through 3 worlds. The first world that existed before the Void Century, built by moon people, unified across a single supercontinent, technologically advanced, biologically diverse, destroyed by a coalition of kingdoms who wanted power more than unity. The second world that rose from the flood, built on the corpse of the first, divided by the Red Line and the Calm Belts, maintained through weaponized geography and 800 years of propaganda, a prison planet where most people don't even know their inmates. And the third world that's coming, that Luffy's going to create by finding the One Piece and activating the ancient weapons and tearing down every barrier that prevents people from gathering in one place. 3 worlds, 3 geological epochs, 3 different answers to the question, what does freedom look like on a planetary scale? And here's what I need you to understand as we close this out. The dawn is not a beginning. It's a return. When Luffy finds the One Piece, when he triggers the planetary reconstruction, when the Red Line collapses and the seas merge and Fishman Island rises and Mary Joyce sinks, he's not going to be creating something new. He's going to be restoring something old. He's going to be bringing back the first world. Not perfectly, not identically, because 800 years have passed and people have changed and the exact configuration of continents and oceans won't match. But the principle will be the same. One planet, one ocean, one unified space where everyone can exist together without artificial barriers dividing them. That's what the first world was. That's what the third world will be. And the second world, this nightmare we've been living in for the entire series, was always temporary. It was always the interlude, the crime scene, the interruption between 2 eras of unity. And Oda's been telling us this since the literal beginning, not chapter 1 of One Piece. Before that, Romance Dawn, the prototype one-shots he wrote before the series started, where he was figuring out the core concept. And the title he chose was Romance Dawn. The romance of the dawn. The adventure of the new beginning. Except it's not a new beginning. It's the dawn after a very long night. It's the sun rising again after 800 years of darkness. And Luffy, the protagonist, is the embodiment of that dawn. Not because he's chosen or destined or prophesied, but because he ate a fruit that was designed to create liberators, and he has a dream that requires planetary unification, and he has the will of D, which marks him as a custodian of the transition, and he's too stubborn and too free to accept the world as it is. He's the dawn personified. He's the return of the first world wearing a straw hat. Think about what Romance Dawn actually means in this context. Romance is adventure, freedom, the pursuit of dreams without compromise. Dawn is the end of night, the return of light, the moment when you can finally see clearly after hours of darkness. Put them together and you get the adventure of seeing clearly, the freedom that comes from understanding what was hidden. And what was hidden? The true shape of the world. The fact that the current geography is artificial. The fact that the barriers can be removed. The fact that the second world is a lie and the third world is achievable. That's the romance. That's the dawn. That's what Luffy represents. He's the adventure that ends with everyone seeing the truth, with everyone understanding that the planet was always supposed to be unified, with everyone gathering in one place for one massive party because the barriers that prevented it no longer exist. And Luffy has no idea. That's the beautiful part. That's the part that makes this work thematically. Luffy is going to terraform the planet back to its original configuration, and he's going to do it because he wants to throw a party. He's going to destroy the Red Line because it's in the way. He's going to use ancient weapons designed for planetary reconstruction because someone told him they're the tools he needs. He's going to fulfill 800-year-old promises and complete the work of the First World's final defenders and trigger the dawn of a new era. And his motivation the entire time is going to be, I want everyone to party together. That's it. That's the whole emotional engine. And it's going to work. Because the First World's engineers, when they designed the failsafes and the poneglyphs and the Nika mythology and the D-Clan network, they understood something fundamental about liberation. They understood that you can't force it through ideology. You can't mandate it through philosophy. You have to make it feel inevitable. You have to create conditions where someone with simple, pure motivations will naturally do the work of changing the world. And Luffy is that someone. He's the person the system was designed to produce. Not a revolutionary who understands the stakes. A kid who wants a party. And the party requires planetary reconstruction. So the reconstruction happens. Remember what I said at the very beginning of this video. I said I need you to forget almost everything you think you know about One Piece. And now, 2 hours later, I'm saying, replace it with this. Replace story about pirates finding treasure with story about reversing a planetary crime. Replace Luffy wants to be Pirate King with Luffy wants to throw a party with everyone and will accidentally terraform the planet to do it. Replace the world government are bad guys with the world government are the architects of segregation maintained through weaponized geography. Replace finding the One Piece with activating a geological reset button left by a civilization that lost a war 800 years ago. That's the actual story. That's what Oda's been writing since 1997. And most of us have been reading it wrong because we accepted the second world as natural, as permanent, as the default state of reality. We didn't question why the Red Line exists, or why the seas are divided, or why Fishman Island is underwater. We just accepted it as world building, as background, as the stage where the story happens, but the stage is the story. The geography is the plot. And when Luffy finally finds Laugh Tale and activates the One Piece and the stage starts collapsing, we're going to realize we've been watching a story about architecture the entire time. The first world was unity. The second world is segregation. The third world is unity restored. And between the second and the third, there's a rubber boy who laughs at danger, makes friends with everyone, refuses to let barriers stop him, and has a dream so simple and so pure that achieving it requires reshaping continents. That's One Piece. That's the three worlds. That's the dawn. And it's not a beginning. It's a return. It's the planet finally becoming what it was always supposed to be before the flood, before the Red Line, before 800 years of lies. One ocean, one people, one massive party where everyone's invited because the barriers that kept them apart no longer exist. And Luffy's going to stand there in the ruins of the second world, surrounded by the debris of collapsed mountains and merged seas and displaced populations. And he's going to smile because he got what he wanted. Everyone's together. The party can finally start. And he'll have no idea that he just completed a mission that was encoded into his devil fruit 800 years ago by people who knew they were going to lose but refused to let the loss be permanent. He'll have no idea that he's the punchline to the greatest joke the first world ever told. He'll just know that his friends are safe, that the barriers are gone, and that the dream he's had since he was 7 years old is finally, impossibly, beautifully real. That's the third world. That's the dawn. That's what comes after Luffy finds the One Piece and pulls the trigger and watches the second world crumble. Not a new beginning. A return. The planet remembering what it used to be and becoming it again. One piece, one planet, one sea, one party. The end of segregation, the death of the prison, the dawn after 800 years of night. And you let me know what you think in the comments. And please do subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed.